Humanity has entered a dark age. Daily bloodshed drives us mad and deprives us of any hope for a brighter future. Horrible monsters have taken over the land and hunt humans, as they are the main element of their diet. A powerful, loud explosion occurred behind the huge army of skeletons. In a desperate battle, two knights clashed, their strengths equal. This made it increasingly difficult to win with each passing minute. Although both of their strength was already waning, they held on well. One of them was Eos, the Empire's mightiest swordsman, one of the few heroes still trying to protect this sinful world. The second one was nicknamed the Death Knight. Although he was human, he sided with the monsters who enslaved the world. However, in this battle, the Hell Knight proved more vulnerable. Eos split his helmet in two. His red, demonic eyes burned like pepper as the knight saw the world for the first time in many years, not through a helmet. Suddenly, their paranormal color vanished. Their gaze cleared, and their eyes returned to their normal color, light blue. The boy was stunned. He looked around in surprise. Meanwhile, the leader of all this chaos rejoiced in his lair. He finally brought that damned empire to its knees with his own strength. There's an old saying that goes, "The longer the wait, the sweeter the revenge." Although the path was long, he eventually achieved what he had planned 1,000 years ago. The empire had been enslaved by none other than the Archlich named Dorgo. The empire's ruler Helios was now his prisoner. Emperor Howard Adel Light was furious. How dare some monster exterminate his entire people? He cursed the enemy in every possible way, but Dorgo even liked it. When the man finally stopped his useless screams, the Lich asked if he could continue with his coronation. After all, he united an entire continent for the first time in history, so he had to celebrate somehow. Calling himself an emperor is hardly an exaggeration. It is true that credit must be given to the Demon Kings and the Death Knight, who obediently helped him achieve his goal and did a great job. Dorgo ordered the Death Knight to bring him the Emperor's crown. The golden headdress shone beautifully in the sun. It would become a visible symbol of the Archlich's greatness. The Dark Knight took it in his hands and slowly approached his master. He made the greatest contribution to bringing Dorgo to this point, which is why he was entrusted with carrying the crown. The new emperor considered rewarding the boy for his service, but then decided that he, as his slave, could do without it. Isn't serving him already the greatest reward in this world? However, something unexpected happened. Just as the crown was about to be placed on the ruler's head, it exploded and shattered into tiny pieces. The Archlich, of course, was almost unharmed, as he managed to reflect the blast wave with his magic. Moreover, the Demon Kings immediately rose to his defense. But a small fragment of the crown still wounded the ruler. He was confused. Why did his faithful assistant do this? He asked the guy about it, but he, as if he hadn't heard him, said that he had finally managed to do what he wanted. For the first time in many years, he can act according to his own will, rather than following the orders of the Dark Lord. The Archlich thought all this time that he had erased the boy's consciousness, even during their first meeting, but this was not so. The boy's consciousness remained intact, but he couldn't control his actions, so he simply observed everything, trapped within his own body. Dorgo calmly stated that the Death Knight was his greatest creation. Therefore, for his achievements, the Lich would allow him to vent his wrath on his creator just once, but only until he found a way to regain control of the warrior. So the Demon Kings immediately pounced on the rebel. But the guy turned out to be quicker, and swinging his sword, threw them all away from himself with a burst of energy. The Archlich is shocked. How could one get rid of all the Demon Kings with just one swing of the sword? In that case, we'll have to resort to the backup plan. The Dark Mage summoned a massive army of evil spirits and ordered them all to tear the traitor to pieces. But as soon as they started running towards him, the Death Knight cast a spell to order them to stop, and they froze in place. His eyes gleamed dangerously. He commanded them all to surrender immediately, using his incantatory voice. Glowing cracks began to spread across the body of the evil spirit. One more movement of the knight's hand, and they all flew apart into small pieces, breaking along those very lines. Here the Archlich realized his greatest mistake. He had created a monster akin to the gods, and then let it slip out of his control. The only thing left for him to do was try to convince the knight not to do something stupid. And if that didn't work, tear him to shreds. The knight is deluded if he thinks victory is his. Even if the Lich's body is destroyed, he will simply send his soul to another vessel. The knight interrupted his thoughts. He said that all these years trapped inside this body, he thought of nothing but the desire to kill his master. The guy swung his sword, and suddenly an incredibly powerful magical field formed around him, eclipsing the world around him with its light. In order to kill Dorgo, he created a sword technique that could cut even the soul. Even though the Lich thought that such a technique couldn't exist, he was still frightened by the magical flow that flew towards him. He tried to dodge, but a blue beam of light pierced his chest at high speed. At first glance, nothing bad had happened. Yes, a hole had appeared in his chest, but for him, an Archlich, that wasn't scary. However, only a moment passed, and suddenly his body was cut by an unbearably strong pain. Dorgo suddenly soared into the sky, no longer controlling his body, and hung high in the sky. Boom! In an instant, his body exploded in a huge purple flash. The body was so shattered that the wind blew it away like dust in the air. Only the skull fell to the ground with a crash. The Death Knight looked down at this pathetic reminder of his shame and wished his former boss to go to hell. He fell powerlessly to his knees and bowed his head to the ground. Finally, it's all over. There's only one thing left to do: apologize to them, even if he can only meet them after death. The people he so mercilessly killed in the past. He must ask his family for forgiveness. So the boy confidently pierced his own heart with a sharp sword. A sinner like him didn't deserve to live. The boy's vision darkened, but just as he was about to face eternal darkness, a flash of bright light suddenly illuminated him. He opened his eyes with difficulty. He saw a sweet girl standing before him, waking him up and calling his name, Damien. The Death Knight, aka Damien, was overjoyed, thinking that it was God who gave him a chance to see his sister in hell before he fell into hell. But something was wrong. At the very least, why did his sister look so young? He hadn't thought about it before suddenly asking the question out loud. The girl laughed at the unexpected compliment. She thought her brother was trying to appease her before their father scolded him again. She smiled and told him he could count on his big sister. She also warned him it would rain soon, so it would be best to go home. Damien sat down on the grass in surprise, and the girl, without waiting for him, ran into the estate. Damien froze. Why was their estate still standing? He clearly remembered destroying that mansion with his own hands. Maybe he's sleeping. Or is he having some kind of deathbed hallucination? Or perhaps the horrors he'd experienced over all these long years were just a figment of his sick imagination. A terrible dream? At that moment, Damien's eye fell on an ordinary stick lying on the grass. He picked it up and stood before the stone, as if holding a sword. The feeling seemed familiar to him. Then the guy got into an attacking position and made a powerful lunge forward. The stick's tip hit the cobblestone with a crack, so much so that it broke right down to the place that was the handle of the improvised sword. Damien felt a tremendous strength within himself and smiled slyly, understanding what would happen next. The boulder cracked into many small stones, and they flew in different directions with force from such a powerful blow from the guy. Damien took a deep breath, and his shoulders shook slightly. He burst into uncontrollable laughter, clutching his head in his hand. His ringing laughter sounded more like the glee of a madman. But just as suddenly as he began laughing, the boy suddenly fell silent and crouched down. He was breathing heavily, as if hunted. The gray clouds in the sky thickened, and it started to rain heavily, just as my sister had warned. Large drops of water ran down the young man's face, but he still couldn't come to his senses. This was definitely not a dream. He returned to the past, his carefree youth, before the world was consumed by suffering. Tears rolled down the boy's cheeks, mingling with the raindrops. However, despite the fact that there were no global catastrophes in this past, Damien had his own problems at this age. He had a special talent, the talent for tarnishing his family's honor. He did all sorts of stupid little things when he was drunk, and not only, he started fights, spent the family money on all sorts of nonsense. But his most fatal mistake was a fight with the son of the Marquis of Lionbloom. By doing this, he trampled not only his own future, but also the future of his sister. Because, to quell the conflict, she had to marry that very same Marquis's son. And he was a real dirty, boorish man. Then, he also borrowed money using their land as collateral, which caused major problems for the parents. So the talent extended not only to the destruction of reputation and honor, but also to more significant material things. As a result, because of this talent, his own father kicked the boy out of his parents' house. Damien had nowhere to go, but it also seemed impossible to atone for all his sins. Before he left his parents' estate forever, only his older sister came out to see him off. She brought him some money so that he would have something to live on for the first time, and with a smile, she sincerely wished him happiness. Even though her life was ruined because of him, she always remained sweet to him. Damien reached for the bag of money with a trembling hand. A bitter lump of guilt and self-disappointment rose in his throat. Unable to even utter a single word of farewell, he grabbed the money and ran out of the house, rushing off into the distance, wherever his eyes looked. It was surprising that he had never experienced such feelings before, even when his parents scolded him, and he saw with his own eyes the detrimental effect he had on the family. The day he ran away from his family was the first time he understood what guilt and shame were. However, after that, much happened in his past life that changed him. How did he manage to get back to the past in the first place? He wanted to apologize to his family by sacrificing himself, but to actually turn back time. The clouds above Damien's head parted, and a ray of sunlight fell upon the rain-dampened clearing. Perhaps this was a divine gift. The boy's hands were still shaking after breaking the stone. As he'd expected, even such a simple technique was now difficult to use. He cast a spell on the stone called Wave of Destruction. This technique amplifies any knight's blow several times, or even dozens of times. He learned it during one of the battles in his past. After killing the knight nicknamed the Destroyer of the Castle Walls, suddenly Damien heard a child's voice behind him. A boy, slightly shorter than him and quite stocky, was running toward him. Quite a few years had passed since the boy had last been in the castle, but he managed to remember that this little one was his family's servant. Damien looked at him carefully, and even managed to remember that his name was Victor. The boy raised his head to him and, having caught his breath, said that Lady Louise had been waiting for the young master in the house for a long time. The lord, who was also Damien's father, was furious. The knight asked for the reason. Victor looked up at him, confused. Did the master really not understand? Be that as it may, Damien immediately went home. Viscounty Haxon. As soon as he entered the house, his father immediately attacked him with a sword and almost cut him in half. Luckily, Damien's mother and sister came to the rescue, grabbed the man, and tried to calm him down. Damien flashed back to the time when he'd caused a ruckus at a bar the day before and gotten thrown out. That's what his father was angry about. His father, Paul Absern Haxon, was already hot-tempered, but now he was ready to practically kill his son. But his wife and daughter wouldn't let him. However, suddenly they all froze at once, staring at Damien. Because they saw how he was shaking slightly and trying to hide his tears, lowering his head. They thought it was because his father was cruel to him. But in reality, he burst into tears because he missed them too much. Paul resigned himself and sheathed his sword, but asked his son what justification he had for his actions. He prepared himself to listen to another lie from his son, but he suddenly honestly admitted that he had no excuses. This greatly surprised the father, who was accustomed to Damien always denying his guilt. The knight himself understood this, but he was still upset when he realized how accustomed his father was to his excuses. Damien admitted that his mistakes had tarnished the honor of the Viscounty of Haxon. They were his fault. There was no room for excuses. Paul sighed heavily. He thought his son was simply trying to appease him so he could get away with it. But Damien apologized, bowed to the elder, and promised that he would make amends. He will correct the mistakes he made and restore honor to the family. Damien headed towards the front door to get to the job immediately. And before leaving, he promised that he would return soon and accept his punishment with dignity when he had fixed everything. When he left, the whole family looked at each other in confusion. The father assumed his son was delirious because he'd hit him on the head too hard. The first thing Damien did was go to a trading town called Landwork. Victor took him to the very bar from which he had recently been shamefully kicked out. The servant told me there were some bad rumors circulating about the bar. They said the syndicate itself was backing them, and he was worried something bad might happen. Damien passed by and said that if he was afraid, he could return to the mansion. But the servant couldn't leave without his master. Then Damien calmed him down and said he only planned to sincerely apologize to the owner of the establishment. What could happen? Victor did not stop him and prayed that everything would go smoothly. Damien walked around the corner and headed straight for the entrance to the bar, looking around the town square, which he hadn't been to in many, many years. He is still not sure how he managed to return to the past. But since God gave him a second chance, he will not allow himself to hurt his family again. He will correct all the mistakes of the past one by one and stop creating new ones. There were two strong security guards standing in front of the entrance to the bar. They immediately recognized Damien and rudely asked him why he had returned here. They had warned him never to come back. Damien doesn't remember them well, as many years have passed, but they seem strangely familiar. The guy smiled affably at the guards and said that he had come to apologize to the owner for what he had done last time. The guards looked at him as if trying to figure out if the guy was lying to them. The sudden apology made them laugh, but one of them promised to convey his apology to the boss. They thought Damien was the eldest son of a bad family, but apparently he's a little better than they thought. And they should have stopped there, because after that, the guys started making fun of Damien's family for all the times their reputation plummeted. One of them even slapped Damien on the cheek and, laughing, said that he could convey his apology only on one condition: if he shows them his pretty little sister and introduces them to her. Then Damien couldn't take it anymore and snatched the dagger from the hands of one of the guards, who was threatening the guy with it. He really hoped to just apologize and go home, but apparently these guys don't understand in a good way. They started shouting at him, but then Damien suddenly swung his dagger. With one movement, he chopped off the hand of the guard who tried to touch him. He fell to his knees and howled from the unbearable pain in his arm. The second one immediately drew his sword from its sheath in fear and took up a defensive position. Damien looked at them angrily and said that now he would show them what kind of hooligan the eldest son of the Viscounty of Haxon was. Victor, meanwhile, stood nearby in the shadows and almost fainted when he saw what had happened. He thought that the gentleman would sort everything out and not make things 100 times worse. Several people came running to the noise, interested in watching the exciting fight. While one guard was still knocked out, his friend stood up to defend his comrade. The man showed the younger man his hand and told him who they were. They were members of the Black Snake, and no one had ever gotten away with a conflict with them. Damien thought for a moment, then remembered what the man was talking about. The Black Snake was an organization that began to expand its influence in landwork around this time, and this bar was one of those they had their eye on. The conflict arose because the guy complained about the expensive food, and not only was he not listened to, but he was also beaten for his insolence. Damien asked them to stop and promised to pay for the food, but these same guards continued to mock and ridicule him in front of the crowd. If you think about it, it was they who should have apologized to him, not him. The guard looked sternly at his opponent and said that he would not be soft with him just because Damien was from nobility. That's why he immediately pounced on the guy, not expecting any response from him. But Damien simply tripped him, and the man fell awkwardly to the ground. He crashed his nose into the ground at full speed, and maybe even broke it. Damien mercilessly said that it would not be enough to even kill them all now for such behavior. But Damien will restrain himself for the good of his family. So he grabbed the guard's leg while he was still lying there, and he cut his foot so that he could no longer walk normally. He collapsed in pain next to his comrade. The brown-haired man thought that that was it. He had dealt with the security, but it was not to be. 4 more hulks with swords ran out of the bar. Backup arrived. They asked him what organization he was from and why he was committing massacres in broad daylight. Damien said he didn't belong to any organization. He came here to apologize, but then realized he owed someone an apology for the mistreatment he'd received. That's why Damien is going to file a complaint against the owner of this bar and ask to be taken to him. But the guards did not believe him, and the leader of the 4 ordered his comrades to seize the insolent man. All 3 of them attacked one person at the same time, which was quite low, but no one cared. And to the knight himself, too, because he ran between the men and, like a hurricane, seriously wounded each of them. All 3 fell and tried to stop the bleeding. The wounds were severe. Their captain watched in shock. Damien had to stop briefly to catch his breath and compose himself. His body wasn't ready for such physical exertion after all. The captain, fearing that the same fate would befall him as his comrades, asked the boy to stop and apologize to him. But Damien still jumped up and chased after him to teach him a lesson. Inside the bar, all was quiet. Men lounged at tables, drinking merrily, while friendly waitresses served the guests. But everything was calm until the front doors swung open with a bang, attracting everyone's attention. The security captain stood at the threshold, his eyes staring lifelessly ahead. He was still alive, but he was badly mauled, and there was a guy standing behind him holding a knife to his neck. As soon as he let go of the captain, he fell to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Damien had gone a bit too far. Seeing a guy with a dirty dagger on the threshold, whose shirt and face were stained with blood, people ran out of the bar, experiencing terrible fear. The guy was even happy about this, since, firstly, there would be fewer witnesses in the bar, and secondly, more space for a fight. Hearing the commotion on the ground floor, the cafe owner ran out of her office. He ran to the balcony and peered down. The bar owner's name is Anderson Home. He looked at the guy with irritation and asked where the security guards had gone and why they'd let him in. Damien said that he dealt with the guys outside, if, of course, the owner means them. Seeing the exhausted captain on the threshold, Anderson realized it was true. But who was he to defeat the members of the Black Snake? The owner angrily asked who he was to disrupt the order of someone else's establishment. Damien introduced himself. He said that he came not to disturb the peace, but for simple words of apology from a man. The bar was overpriced, he made a remark, and they beat him up and threw him out. Because of this, everyone around him now considers him an alcoholic and a troublemaker. And his family lost too much, including their reputation, because of this incident. So the guy was furious, and a public apology was the least Home could do for him. The owner laughed and asked if his family still had anything to lose. As he had heard, the Vice County of Haxon no longer had any honor to lose. Did the boy really think he'd run to apologize at his command? Better let him pay for the damage he caused the bar and get lost. A mad grin appeared on the brown-haired man's face. He had honestly intended to forgive these scoundrels, but it was too late to apologize now. If the owner wants to play differently, then so be it. Pushing off the furniture a few times, Damien nimbly jumped up and found himself on the same level as the man. He must pay for what he said. No one has the right to speak ill of the Haxon family. But suddenly, an unknown warrior in a black hood flew out right in front of the owner and pushed Damien away from the boss. Damien found himself down again and landed on the floor. The master praised his servant for arriving just in time. Damien was pleasantly surprised by his opponent's strength. He also praised him and said he shouldn't work in a place like that. This knight's name was Sir Ted. Although Damien didn't know it, he recognized the man as a man of noble birth. So what is a strong knight doing in such a place? Knights in this world follow the path of martial arts their entire lives. Based on their skill level, they are assigned ranks: trainee, apprentice knight, and official knight. The last rank is the strongest. Official knights are knights who can freely use aura. They use their internal mana energy to enhance their attacks and can cut down mountains with a single blow. They are people of exceptional talent. The owner of this bar was incredibly lucky to have such a warrior at his disposal, and he knew it perfectly well. He proudly announced that Ted was a knight apprentice who was very close to the boss of the Black Snake. This explained to Damien where the boy got such abilities, and the voiced rank explained to him what kind of weak aura he felt from the enemy when they collided. Ted tensed up. How could he sense some kind of aura if the knight hadn't even materialized it? However, Damien now understood why the knight worked in such a place. He was thrown out because he was not talented enough to advance to the rank of official knight. This statement deeply hurt the knight and pressed on his weak spot, so that he was instantly filled with hatred for the upstart. Now he himself had a reason to kill Damien and rip his chattering mouth apart. The guy jumped from the balcony and tried to hit his opponent, but the brown-haired man deftly dodged. The elder's movements were wide and his strikes precise. For a knight in training, he was quite skilled, but Haxon was more agile. Damien managed to dodge all of his blows, but he's almost at his limit. With a body like this, he can't push himself to his full potential. Soon, we will need to focus on improving the endurance of this body. After a few minutes of fighting, the knight's patience was at its limit, and he demonstrated his signature blow. It was a powerful secret technique that was supposed to hit Damien like a killer beam. The guy closed his eyes. This requires a suitable response. At such a crucial moment, for some reason memories from his past life flashed in his head. The time he fought a crazy mercenary. He said he didn't kill everyone because that would end all the fun in the world. But he was not averse to killing the Death Knight. He seemed like an interesting opponent to him. Out of the kindness of his heart, he first offered Damien to leave if he did not want to die in battle. But he not only didn't answer, but didn't move at all. The guy himself was nicknamed the Phantom Assassin. He was a legendary killer, master of the Death Blade. He then said that since Damien had asked for his own death, he would reveal his secret technique to the enemy. Most of the human body is made up of water, and the use of technology was directly based on this title. He rushed past Damien and slashed at him with his sword, using the Death Blade's secret technique. The knight fell to the ground, his torso and legs separated from each other. It seemed he was dead. But when the assassin turned around, he saw that the knight had miraculously remained alive. Moreover, he rose to his feet, and both parts of his body grew together thanks to an unprecedented level of regeneration. Thanks to Dorgo's service, the boy became half undead and acquired such useful abilities that they helped him win any battle. The knight pierced the mercenary with his piercing, searching gaze. He seemed to scan his opponent and then pounced on him with renewed confidence. Surprisingly, it only took him a few seconds to understand how the assassin's technique worked, so he killed his opponent with his own technique. Since Damien still had all the knowledge from his past life, he couldn't help but use the skill he had learned earlier. With the same Deathblade technique, he cut Ted's body in half. It's always like this. All of Damien's enemies couldn't believe what had killed them. After becoming a Death Knight, he gained a unique ability. The ability to absorb the skills and talents of your enemies. Seeing how mercilessly his henchman was dealt with, Home was very scared. And together with the surviving guards, he offered his deepest apologies to Damien so that things wouldn't get any worse. They also paid a huge amount of money as monetary compensation for the damage and inconvenience caused. Damien didn't even hope for financial consolation, but if they offer it, there's no point in refusing. The guy noticed that a little boy was watching them from the doorway. He realized it was Victor, so he ordered him to come in and pack everything the owner had given them. Victor carried out the order, looking at his master a little timidly. He would never have believed what had happened if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. When did the master learn such sword techniques? When all the gold was packed into the backpack, the owner walked Damien outside and wished him a safe journey home. Damien didn't answer and proudly trudged back to the estate. Anderson, although he looked friendly in the last minutes, cursed the guy silently. He was already planning his revenge in his head, but then suddenly, Damien's blade whistled right next to his head. The boy cut off his ear as punishment for his terrible behavior towards the aristocrat and threatened them to be afraid to mess with him. Damien ordered the man to tell his boss at the Black Viper that if they laid a finger on his family, they would not get away with it. Home nodded his head in agreement, but silently promised to respond to Damien with the same cruelty with which he treated them. Now Damien was definitely heading home. Even though he'd accomplished something quite important today, he realized that this would not wash away his past sins, but in his new life, he can at least become better, and no longer disappoint your family, but on the contrary, help them. This evening, the estate of the Marquis of Lionbloom. A young man stood in front of the mirror and admired his reflection. He told his brother, who was lying behind him, about the proverb, "Love is always followed by pain." The brother thought that the guy was getting ready for some dangerous fight since he was saying such things, but he, on the contrary, was getting ready to find his love. The next morning, Viscount Haxon. Damien didn't make it back by nightfall, so he had to stay at a motel. It wasn't until morning that he and Victor finally returned home. The boy complained that, unlike his older brother, he hadn't slept well that night. What he saw last night had shaken him so much that he couldn't sleep a wink. But the main thing was that everything went well. Of course, Damien deviated from the original goal, but they got a big reward. And most importantly, rumors will soon begin to spread that some daredevil was defeated by the Viscount's eldest son, and then they won't treat their family so frivolously anymore. And the rumors about the Viscount's worthless son will diminish. Victor agreed with everything, but he's worried about the Black Snake. Damien beat up not only their men, but even the hired apprentice knight. The guy assured them that no matter how brave they were, they would not dare attack a noble family. Victor believed him and calmed down a bit. Then he asked where the young master had learned such a sword technique. The guy answered evasively that he simply trained from time to time and somehow got the hang of it. Suddenly, from the other end of the corridor, someone angrily called out to Damien. It was his father, running towards them. Paul was mad as hell because after Damien got scolded yesterday, he just disappeared for another day. He thought that his son had done something stupid again, and now they would have to pay twice as much. But Damien calmed him down and said that during this time he had taken care of the last scandal. Victor opened the bag of gold and showed his parents what they had brought back from this trip. The boy's mother, Marilda, nearly fainted with joy. Finally, they would be able to pay the servants back wages. Damien explained that he returned to the bar where he'd been kicked out and cleared up the misunderstanding. The bar owner gave him all of this as an apology. The parents couldn't believe that everything their son said was true, so they were a little wary about the money. Damien said that since they didn't believe him, they could ask Victor, since he saw everything with his own eyes. The boy winked at the servant and asked him to confirm that everything he'd told him was true. Victor agreed, even though Damien's story had been embellished. The parents had no reason not to trust the boy, so they were convinced that their son was not lying to them. Damien is a pathological liar, but at least this story wasn't a traumatic lie for his parents. After talking with his parents, Damien went for a run on the slope to get some exercise. He'd only run a short distance, but he was already out of breath. His body was too weak and slow at the moment. He has so much to do, but it's impossible in this state. That's why the guy got hold of a very tempting elixir the day before. In his hands was a small bottle of tonic created by the Alchemy Academy to increase stamina and energy. He took it from the bar owner when he was choosing what to take from him as compensation. The Academy of Alchemists is a group of specialists who are engaged in the creation of various tonics. Their tonics are said to sell for the same price as precious stones. So Damien was very lucky that such a find fell into his hands for free. He didn't wait for the right moment and immediately drank the entire bottle to the bottom. A feeling of uncontrollable strength and energy immediately spread through his body. This thing is very powerful. If he wants to become stronger as quickly as possible, he must first develop endurance. He must return to the same level he had in his past life. At that moment, he remembered the main reason he was doing all this. Dorgo. In just a few years, the undead created by this bastard will come to this world. The guy needs to have time to gain strength by that moment and kill him before tragedy occurs. Only then will he be able to protect his family's happiness. This time he will finish off Dorgo. So, without wasting any time, the guy ran off to continue training. That same night, on the outskirts of the city, Landworks, the Black Snake's hideout. It turns out Ted wasn't dead after all. His limp body was brought to the Black Snake's boss to see what to do with it. The man said the guy was completely useless now. Too bad. He was the best they could hire. The boss, Cedric Walker, looked like he had never held a sword in his life. He ordered his henchmen to throw Ted out and not even send him for treatment since they no longer needed him. They can buy any knight to replace him if they pay enough. The wounded Ted used his last strength to get to his feet. So that's how it was. He gave his all to the organization, did not spare his health and life, and now the boss is even mocking him? The man was amused that the boy could still stand on his feet despite such an injury, so he suggested that the knight recover, and then they would hire him again. But Ted, hearing how mercilessly they were going to get rid of him, was not prepared for this. He became very angry and attacked the man with a sword. But suddenly, some dark magical tentacles grabbed his leg, and Ted was unable to reach the leader. In just an instant, those tentacles grew even larger, and they grabbed him so tightly that the boy couldn't move. It took Ted a moment to realize that it was the magic of some mercenary standing behind him. He was supposed to become a new member of the Black Viper. So the boss decided to take advantage of the opportunity and suggested that he show what he could do on Ted. The wizard obediently set to work and whispered some strange spell in a language incomprehensible to those around him. At that moment, Ted felt like he was in some kind of nightmare. Not only was he bound by some tentacles of black material, but strange things appeared around him. The magical jaws pounced on him and tore the poor guy into little pieces. Having dealt with the knight, the wizard received his contract. His first task was to eliminate the man who had damaged their reputation. The boss said the more this man suffered, the higher the magician's pay would be. The man was talking about Damien. The magician immediately received an advance payment and promised to ensure that the revenge was carried out perfectly. While the enemies were plotting their devious plan behind Damien's back, He continued training. It's only been a few days, but his endurance has already improved significantly, and his muscle mass has increased thanks to intense training. He reached for his water bottle to take a short break mid-workout. He thought it was strange that nothing had happened in the last few days. He'd thought the black snake would come for him. Suddenly, he heard something stirring in the bushes next to him. Could he really be right? Were the enemies coming for him? Damien made a sharp leap towards the bush and grabbed the man hiding there by the neck. But it turned out to be not a spy, but his younger brother Abel. Damien let him go. The brother, rubbing his neck, looked irritably at the elder and said that he had become much stronger during the time they had not seen each other. Damien, looking at his brother, tried not to dwell on the thought of how he had inhumanely chopped off his brother's head in his past life. He extended his hand to the boy to help him up and sincerely apologized for frightening him. Abel initially wanted to use the helping hand, but then turned away offended and said that he did not come for an apology. His father told him that Damien had received an apology at the bar, but he had also heard that there had been a fight at the bar in which many people had been injured. Abel didn't believe in his brother and thought there was no way he could have emerged victorious. Could he really be deceiving them? Damien confidently said he hadn't lied to his family. He had truly defeated them. Abel yelled at him and said that the elder didn't even know how to fight, so how could he win on his own? Maybe he hired someone. Damien protested, but the boy didn't listen. In any case, he shouldn't do anything that could negatively impact the family. His brother's harsh attitude could have upset Damien, but he understood that the younger brother was simply very worried about his family. So he stroked his diligent brother with a smile, even though he didn't like the gesture. Damien laughed and promised that from now on he would do nothing that would bring trouble to the Haxons. At that moment, Victor came running and called the young men to him. He said that they had very bad news, and the brothers immediately stopped arguing, turning their attention to the servant. Hearing what happened, they both immediately ran inside the estate and burst into the living room. There at the table, their parents and a fair-haired guy who had dropped in to visit them were drinking tea. This guy was Erwin Lionbloom, the same Marquis's son with whom Damien had recently fought. Damien hoped that the guy would keep this situation quiet, but this slimy guy deliberately made the story public to harm him. The incident they were talking about took place at a recent banquet to which both boys were invited. At that banquet, the blonde insulted not only Damien, but also his sister, while believing that he had said nothing of the sort. But Damien wasn't about to tolerate such humiliation. The blonde laughed at him and said the guy was too drunk to do anything. He leaned closer to his opponent and called him a brainless idiot, thinking that Haxon would not have the courage to answer him. Damien shouldn't have given in to his provocation, but his emotions got the better of him, so he punched the vile aristocrat in the nose with all his might. Damien then found it strange that a man close to becoming a knight would allow him to beat him up so easily. He guessed that the guy did it to ask the Haxon family for something in return, to hush up the conflict. The scoundrel confessed to Damien's parents that he had always admired their eldest daughter, Louise. Therefore, in connection with recent events, he asks them to give their consent to his wedding with the girl. The whole family was shocked. They were going to give their beautiful little girl to such a scoundrel? History repeats itself. In his past life, Erwin also took advantage of the fact that their Viscountcy was poor. Despite the fact that this wedding would have really helped to pretend that nothing had happened, the father of the family did not give his consent. This greatly angered the Marquis's son. Paul said that his daughter already had a fiancé. Erwin didn't want to hear anything about it. How could the Haxon family then cope with his family's wrath? He gave them an ultimatum. Either they give him Louise, or their family would face dire consequences from the Marquis. The Lionblooms are one of the most powerful noble families in the kingdom. But the father cannot allow this notorious scumbag to take his daughter. Paul didn't have time to answer him when Lady Louise suddenly entered the room. She said that she accepted the guy's proposal. Her father and brother tried to stop her, saying she was making a terrible mistake. They could fix it another way. But Louise remained adamant, despite the fact that she herself understood what this decision would mean for her. Even in this life, she is ready to sacrifice herself to save her family, and first of all, her brother. Erwin smiled contentedly and said that Louise was quite a wise girl. He approached her and promised that he would soon send an official request, and they would have time to discuss all the details later. But Damien interrupted his speech and stood between the scoundrel and his sister. Erwin mockingly patted the guy on the shoulder, not once being afraid of him, and jokingly called him his brother-in-law. Louise watched with horror as her brother's mood rapidly worsened. With each passing second, it became increasingly difficult for him to control himself. The guy whispered some kind of threat, but Erwin didn't hear him. Then, instead of repeating it, Damien went and hit him so hard that his jaw cracked. He shouldn't have fallen for Erwin's provocation last time, but this time the bastard deserves to get what he deserves. Damien cannot stand by and watch his sister's fate crumble. In her past life, after Louise married Lionbloom, she and Damien rarely saw each other. But one day, Louise came to visit. Damien joyfully ran to the room where his sister and her husband were, but did not have time to go inside. Because I unwittingly witnessed their quarrel. That idiot Erwin grabbed his sister by the hair in a rage and shouted loudly at her. The quarrel occurred because the girl was already tired of this constant bullying and beatings and threatened to run away from her husband. Of course, this made him furious. So he took her to a secluded room and beat her even harder than usual, to remind her that Louise was nothing but his property. Damien stood outside the door, watching in horror as his sister was being beaten. He couldn't find the courage to intervene and pull the abuser away. It's his fault. Because of him, Louise was taken away. Because of him, she suffers so much. In his past life, the guy had to live with this feeling of guilt all his life, but in this one, he will not allow this to happen again. So Damien punched the would-be groom and firmly said that Louise would never belong to him. Erwin's bodyguards came running to the noise to check what had happened. Seeing their young master lying on the floor, the guards became seriously angry. Erwin's personal guard stood by him like a mountain, so they immediately drew their swords and approached the younger Haxon. Erwin sat up on the floor, coming to his senses, and an evil laugh escaped his lips. How dare such a weakling hit him in the face not just once, but twice? He took out his sword and assumed that Damien had a strong desire to die to have gotten involved with him. Erwin's guards ran forward and shielded him, saying that they would deal with the offender themselves. But Erwin ordered them to leave because he himself wanted to teach him a lesson. One of the knights said that this was wrong. They must protect him. But he got caught in the heat of the moment, and Erwin irritably threw him into the wall nearby. He said that he would deal with it himself, so he will. He walked closer to Damien and asked how Haxon was going to handle this situation. Louise was seriously scared. Now the guy definitely wouldn't leave Damien alone. She screamed and asked the blonde to stop, but Damien covered her with his hand and gently asked her not to interfere. He smiled at her and said that everything was fine. He would figure it out himself. It's enough for his sister to sacrifice herself for him. Damien challenged Erwin to a duel. If Erwin won, Damien would do whatever he was told. But if Damien won, Erwin would forget about the incident. The blonde said that these conditions were not favorable for him, since Lady Louise had already agreed to marry him. Damien then decided to provoke the guy and asked if he was simply afraid of losing the duel. Erwin had been thinking for a long time about how to pay Damien back for the humiliation, so this was the perfect chance. That's the only reason he agreed to the fight, to cripple Damien and take his sister for himself. They had a duel in the backyard of the mansion at sunset. Marilda suggested her husband stop them, but Paul trusted his son. If he sounded so confident, he must have had something planned. Abel was not as confident in his older brother as their father, because the younger Lionbloom is presumably already at the level of an official knight. Damien will have no way of defeating him. Erwin looked at Damien and, not noticing that he had no weapon, asked if he was really going to fight without a sword. Damien pulled out an ordinary table fork from behind his back and said that this would be enough for him to defeat Erwin. Everyone present, including Erwin, nearly dropped their jaws. Is Damien kidding me? Erwin didn't even take this as an insult, but just laughed loudly. He thought Damien was simply out of his mind with fear, and he warned him that he would not be lenient with him just because of his choice of weapon. He lunged at the guy, but Damien jumped aside from his blow. Realizing that the fight would not be so simple, Erwin decided not to hesitate and used the sword technique of a ferocious roaring lion on his enemy. He swung his sword and stamped his foot so hard that a huge wave of force hit Damien's side, which actually sounded like a powerful roar. But when the haze of dust cleared, Erwin saw how confidently Damien continued to stand on his feet. The guards were horrified. How could he possibly have survived one of their master's most powerful attacks? In such a short moment, the brown-haired man dodged all the movements of his sword of a fierce, roaring lion. Damien was pleased to see his opponent stunned. It all came down to his training over the past few days, as well as the perfect analysis of the Lionbloom family's sword art, which he conducted in his past life while fighting Michael Lionbloom. Yes, during the regression, Damien managed to fight with his older brother, and Erwin is much weaker than him. Erwin materialized a powerful force field around himself and said Damien was just lucky to survive. But let's see if he can avoid the next attack. The monstrous aura of the boy's sword made Damien tense up, but he kept his head cool and quickly came up with a way to respond to this attack. The holy sword technique is ideal for him in this situation. Their weapons clashed, if a fork could be called a weapon at all, and the loud clang of iron deafened the knights. Damien stopped his opponent's sword by trapping the blade between the tines of a fork, and he abruptly threw the enemy's sword aside when he didn't expect it. With his strength, Damien could easily finish off the braggart with that very fork. He made a powerful lunge forward, plunging it into Erwin's throat, and he almost went to his ancestors out of fear. Everyone around was afraid for Erwin's life, even the Haxan. But Damien deliberately stopped the fork so as to only cut the Marquise's neck with one prong. The blonde jumped back in fear and fell to the ground. He looked like a hunted animal. Killing him dozens of times for bullying Louise wouldn't have been enough, but Damien stopped for the good of his family and spared him. He looked sternly down at the boy, who was distraught with fear, and said that the winner had been determined. Erwin's heart sank so much that he was unable to utter a word in response. And Damien ordered the blonde to get off his land as agreed. And that was the end of it. The next day, the entire Haxan family had breakfast at the same table. Damien was the first to leave, saying he was going to morning training. The table remained quiet. They all seemed tense. Marilda was the first to speak. She asked her husband if perhaps he could talk to Damien about what had happened yesterday. And it wouldn't hurt to do the same with Abel, because he's become somewhat absent-minded. Apparently, he's too shocked by his brother's sudden transformation. But the head of the family asked them all to calm down and not press Damien with questions. He would tell them everything when he wanted to. Even though the father didn't show it outwardly, he was also terribly curious about where his son got such incredible strength. But after yesterday, Damien scares him, so it's probably better not to pester him with questions about this. Meanwhile, Damien prepared for the upcoming workout. For maximum effectiveness, he wore 10-kilogram ankle weights on each leg. But before he could go out into the yard, his sister ran up to him. She was overjoyed to have managed to intercept the boy before training. She was clutching some kind of sword in her hands. The girl, a little nervously and embarrassed, said that she wanted to talk about what happened yesterday. Damien froze for a moment, then remembered that he should apologize. He asked her forgiveness for having acted recklessly and put her in a difficult situation. He should have apologized in advance and said that he would do everything to ensure that something like this never happened again. But she stopped him and said he didn't need to apologize. On the contrary, she had come to thank him. In fact, she was very scared. Even though she had said she would go with Erwin, her heart was saying a clear no. Damien looked at her tenderly. So this is what she wanted in her past life. She is very grateful to her brother for standing up for her. Yesterday, she regretted it, and at the same time was glad. However, now she's genuinely happy that it's all over, and it happened thanks to Damien's support. The boy couldn't help but smile when he saw how genuinely happy the older woman was. He said that he himself would like to thank his older sister for everything. The girl didn't understand what exactly he was thanking her for, but Damien didn't specify. He thought the conversation was over, but his sister had something else for him. She handed him their father's favorite sword and said that he had given it to him so that his son could use it in his training. The girl secretly told him that even though their dad wasn't very good at expressing his feelings, he still loved Damien very much. But he said to convey to him the following words. Damien is the son of a viscount, and therefore he will never again dare to use a fork instead of a sword. Damien grinned and pulled the sword from its sheath, testing it out. He really liked the way the dangerous blade shimmered in the sun. And it's good that he doesn't know that his father has many other favorite things. That way, the gift will seem more precious. The day passed relatively calmly for the Haxans, but at night, dark clouds began to gather over the mansion. Although the onlooking guards were watching the entrance to the mansion, there was something that their keen eyes could not catch. some kind of black matter that slid neatly towards the mansion and silently knocked them out so that they wouldn't cause any problems. Sinister themes crept inside, onto the mansion's grounds, and it turned out that the very same wizard from the Black Snake was hiding under this spell. Inside the estate, everyone was asleep, both parents and their children. No one heard anything happening in the house, and under cover of night, the dark magician made his way into Luisa's room, stopping next to her bed. He licked his lips slyly at the sight of such a beauty. The girl was fast asleep. He'd actually come at Black Snake's request, but he'd unexpectedly struck it lucky. How could he pass up such a vulnerable cutie? But there was still one person in the house who was always on guard. Damien appeared in the doorway. He glared angrily at the intruder, barely containing his ardor, and asked what he was doing here. Damien felt a strange energy coming from this room and realized that someone had gotten into them, so he came to check. The mage hesitated. How could he, if his magic was supposed to put everyone to sleep? He hadn't even noticed the stranger's presence until the boy came so close. Without waiting for the guy to attack him first, the magician decided to act preemptively. He conjured a powerful energy pillar that struck straight at the young man. The knight jumped to the side, and this thick beam hit the wall, smashing it into pieces. The wizard looked at him with a crazy look and asked the guy who the hell he was. Damien laughed it off, saying he should be the one asking that question. After all, the enemy had broken into his house. That's why I asked him directly who he was and what he was going to do with his defenseless sister. But at that moment, a noise was heard at the far end of the corridor. It was Haxon's guards running toward the noise from the room. It seemed the servants had awakened from their sleep by the sound of a magical explosion. Moreover, it was beginning to dawn. The mage would be in trouble if a crowd gathered, so he began to envelop himself in a viscous, demonic mixture of magic. And, completely dissolved in it, he went out the window, escaping. Damien rushed after him but did not manage to stop him, and the enemy climbed down along the wall and disappeared into the distance. However, he did not manage to disappear completely from the estate. In his haste, he accidentally left a small piece of his dark magic on the window frame, which the boy noticed. A little later in the morning, the servants noticed another unpleasant consequence of the previous night. One of the family's prized horses was found dead. The servants were horrified. The Viscount, upon learning of this, would be furious. But how did this happen? The horse was completely healthy yesterday. At that moment, Damien appeared behind them and frightened them with his sudden appearance. They thought that they would definitely be punished now, but Damien said that he was not going to blame anyone and asked them to remain calm. He smiled and asked the boys to leave him alone to check something. The servants obediently left the room. He bent over the animal and studied it. It still bore the trace of energy it had lost the night before, but had now regained. There is no doubt about it, this sinister energy is definitely dark magic, and it belongs to their uninvited guest. This means a dark mage visited the estate last night. Damien pieced together the full chain of events in his head and came to the conclusion that his family still knew nothing about what had happened. And he decided that he would not bother them, but would try to sort out the situation on his own. He focused on the trail of dark energy, which remained quite visible, and decided to follow it to find the mage. Meanwhile, the villain reached his sinister lair, which was hidden in a cave in the forest. Inside, he found something like a secret laboratory. Inside, he discovered a large cart filled with a variety of magical ingredients. The Black Snake's boss provided him with everything he needed to carry out his plan. Only, he told the boss that he needed ingredients for a curse spell, but in fact he blatantly lied. Now he would be able to conduct his experiments at any time. However, the current state of affairs still frustrated him. With the church on his tail, he had to go into hiding and now makes his living doing menial tasks. Just when he thought that he would have to lie low soon, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. Someone from behind contemptuously asked the magician what kind of stench was coming from his cave. The guy standing behind him advised the old man to air out his den. It was Damien Haxon, the same guy he had fought last night. Damien told him that he found him easily, as he followed the stench left by the magician. But the man isn't afraid of him. He heard the boy recklessly confront the black snakes, so he considers him nothing more than a reckless boy. Since Damien had already guessed everything, the mage did not hide the fact that he had been hired to cause as much damage to the Haxon family as possible. The guy chuckled. What a pity. The wizard took on such a dirty job and now he'll die because of it. This statement made the man laugh quite a bit. What a presumptuous young man. The mage's face twisted into a crazed grimace. He had imbued his body with dark magic and prepared for battle. Now he was fundamentally interested in defeating the boy. But Damien wouldn't let that happen. He casually confessed to the mage that he'd sworn to himself that in this life, he wouldn't kill anyone unless it was absolutely necessary. There is one exception, however: dirty magicians like him. The man was surprised that Damien could distinguish dark magic from ordinary magic. Apparently, he was no ordinary guy. This knowledge only strengthened the mage's desire to deal with him. If Damien managed to slip away, the man would be in serious trouble. But Damien confidently flew past the magical beams that the mage launched in his direction, and he quickly covered the distance between them, getting very close. With his blade, he cut the magician's body in two, and dark energy, like a fountain of blood, splashed in all directions. However, something unexpected happened. The wizard did not die, but took on a jelly-like form thanks to his skills, and survived. His body is reassembling itself. Apparently, this is the same ability Damien saw in the mansion. The magician is quite powerful for someone who takes on such a crappy job. Every time Damien cut the man's body with his sword, the same thing happened as the first time. The mage recovered in a second. Damien got really angry and said that he would then cut him until there was nothing left of him. A deadly wave of rapid chopping blows and powerful lunges fell upon the man. The magician admitted that his technique was not bad, since in order to escape the blows, he had to split himself into small pieces. However, the moment Damien walked in here of his own free will, he signed his own death warrant. Behind Damien, the familiar demonic monsters in the form of flying jaws appeared. The tenacious demonic tentacles grabbed Damien, and the jaws, opening their mouths wide, attacked him, clicking their sharp teeth. The magician had enchanted every corner here to prevent persecution of the church, but now all these traps have fallen upon another intruder. The magician laughed madly and threatened that he would regret crossing Yulan's officer's path. Dark energy has completely enveloped the young man, and if the process is not stopped, his body could completely rot to the ground. The magician chuckled sarcastically and told Damien that by trying to escape, he was only shortening his life. But at the same time, he was glad that the boy was suffering, because this suited the customer's conditions exactly. Now that no one will disturb him, he will meet with the lady he met at the Haxon's house. However, there was a cracking sound behind him, and Damien cut through the black material with his sword, miraculously getting out. The magician was shocked. How much did this guy know about black magic? But Damien was no less stunned. How could the powers he'd gained in his past life while serving the Dark Emperor remain within him? This power is also known as the power of God. Damien received it while serving Dorgo, who was obsessed with the idea of creating an invincible warrior. First, he gifted his Death Knight with the strongest body and filled him with the most powerful magic. However, this wasn't enough to completely satisfy Dorgo. Damien was destined to become the most powerful sword and the Lich's greatest weapon. So he took the dagger in his hand and cut his palm, releasing dark blood mixed with black magic. Reaching forward, he bestowed his power upon the knight, transforming him into the ultimate weapon. However, he himself did not expect how strong the effect of his actions would be. As soon as Dorgo gave the knight just a small part of his energy, the dungeon was illuminated by a powerful pillar of light. A magical vortex surrounded Damien, and his body was completely saturated with the incredible power given to him. Dorgo himself was confused by this unexpectedly powerful force. Damien's body was not ready for such a flow of magic, so he screamed hysterically, barely holding the energy inside himself. Finally, Dorgo's plan came to fruition, which the Archlich could not help but rejoice at. Finally, his right hand acquired the power of a god. Now they would be invincible. But why did Damien retain the power of God after his regression? It was definitely the same power he wielded as a Death Knight. He didn't have time to think about it as a new wave of magical attacks rained down on the captive. Damien pushed off the ground with force and jumped over the magical stream. The magician ordered him to answer. How did the boy survive his spell? He answered evasively that everyone has a couple of hidden cards up their sleeve. What interested Damien more was that the magician identified himself as Yulan's officer. The boy had heard of Yulan. It was an organization specializing in assassinations using dark magic. It's no wonder he's so talented. But what made him leave? Something about Damien's behavior struck the mage as odd. The longer the fight dragged on, the worse off the mage found himself. It was time to use his secret weapon. He'd saved it for when he encountered the church, but things were getting more complicated here. The magician had a magic bracelet on his hand, which served as his secret weapon. Everything around suddenly became illuminated by a powerful green flame, and Damien noticed that a huge amount of dark mana was emanating from the bracelet. There must be an artifact hidden in his bracelet that stores mana. The wizard cast a huge, bloodthirsty, ugly monster in the sky, which was about to pounce on the guy. After many threats, the magician finally ordered his creation to brutally attack the enemy, and he took off, leaving behind only a long, glowing trail in which Damien disappeared. The mage breathed a sigh of relief. Damien had been touched by hellfire, which burns forever, even after death, meaning the boy was definitely finished. But that was not the case. Suddenly, Damien's voice was heard from the flames. The mage's eyes widened in fear. But how was this possible? How strong was this young man? Damien stepped forward from the fire and said that the magician still didn't understand anything about him. God's power does not cancel out magic. It completely absorbs all dark mana. The magician was already in a real rage. Who was he that he possessed such terrifying power? Damien readied his sword and said it was none of his business. How angry it is for the boy that he must use the power given to him by the one he hates the most. However, for the kill now before him, he has no choice but to use the Death Knight technique. Damien used Sword Aura, a technique that only those who have reached the level of Sword Master can use. He swung his blade and slashed straight ahead with all his might. It was a soul-rending cut. The blade pierced the enemy's forehead, and unbearable pain pierced his entire body, so intense that his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. The sorcerer was thrown back by the powerful blast wave from the magical strike due to inertia, and he fell limply to the ground. The magical field he had created around him gradually weakened and began to fade. But the sorcerer wasn't dead yet. Damien needed him alive to get information, so he moved closer. And he said that he would ease the old man's suffering if he answered him one more question before he died. Where is the black snake's hideout? He had no choice but to answer. The next day, Damien set off by cart to a trading town called Landwork. On the way, Victor asked the gentleman if something had happened. Why had he decided to return to Landworks? They had been there recently. Without looking up from his book, Damien told Victor that since he had decided to accompany him, it would be better if he did it silently. Victor's attention was drawn to the ominous book in the owner's hands, so he inquired about it. Damien said that he had in his hands a grimoire of dark magic that he had recently acquired by defeating a dark wizard. Victor frowned and reminded that dark magic grimoires were very dangerous and difficult to obtain. He also noticed that a strange, musty smell had become stronger inside the cart. He had been stalking them the entire trip, but now he had become completely unbearable. When the carriage arrived at its destination, Damien grabbed a small bag and jumped out. The strange smell emanated from this bag. Damien handed it to the servant and said that he had one task for the boy. He suddenly told the servant that there was a human head inside the bag. Victor didn't believe it and said that he wasn't such an idiot as to fall for such crude jokes. But when he opened the bag, he was convinced of the gentleman's words and fearfully threw the bag back to him. Damien calmed the frightened boy and asked him to be quiet because people were looking at them. He will later explain to Victor what happened, but first he needs to do something for the master. He handed the servant the bag and the grimoires and said that they were to be delivered to a place that Damien would name. Only if they do as he said will it not get them into trouble. Having sent the boy on an errand, Damien himself went to the high tower in the center of the city. Two giants stood at the entrance. Noticing Damien, they shouted at him, "Who is he?" The guy came closer and introduced himself to the guards. He is Damien Haxon of the Vice-County of Haxon. The boy's name meant nothing to them, and even made them laugh, because the young man's last name reminded them of a pig's leg. Suddenly, it dawned on one of them that the name sounded familiar. It was the guy their boss had told them about. Damien told them that he had business with their leader, so he asked them to let him in quietly. One of the guards also calmly replied that Damien could pass, and he was glad that at least someone was listening to common sense. But the very next second he realized that this was not so, when the second guard threateningly fired his pistol into the sky. It turned out to be a flare, so at that very moment, the sky above their heads turned red. Dozens of people who had been hiding in the shadows suddenly poured out from all corners of the square. Damien found himself surrounded. The guard said it was a welcome gift prepared for Damien by their boss. But of course, this didn't cause the slightest alarm in the young man's soul. He smiled and said that the bandits would regret what they had done. Meanwhile, inside the tower, a feast was in full swing. Sebastian Baker, the governor of Landwork, sat at the table, gorging himself. Next to him, the knight of Landwork, Robert, was drinking relaxedly. And the host of this whole party was the man who is the head of the Black Snakes, Cedric. Thanks to his appeasement of the governor, the latter decided to give him some trading places that were owned by other syndicates. It would be convenient for him, too, if the Black Snake took control of the entire Red Lights area, and they could cooperate and get rich together. The governor can easily suppress competitors with his power. Robert, already quite drunk, intervened in the conversation and said that it was a pity that he could not do anything for their plan. But Cedric flattered him and praised him, saying that it was so difficult for Robert to guard their glorious city of Landwork. The man really liked the flattery, and he laughed sheepishly. Cedric pretended to genuinely respect and desire friendship with both of them, but in reality, he was acting only out of his own interests. It would not be long before he could bow his head and flatter these people who were just pieces of trash to him. Soon he will use his connections, and the Black Snake will take over the entire city, and then it will be they who will bow before him. Just then, one of Cedric's henchmen ran into the room, looking very agitated. The man tried to drive him away because he was receiving very important guests, but the news turned out to be urgent. Cedric and his servant went out into the corridor so as not to disturb his comrades with their conversations. But after the servant's words, he could not control himself, and he shouted Damien's name angrily so that Robert and the governor inside turned to the door in fear. Cedric turned blue with tension. Why isn't that black mage doing his job? At least they set up an ambush around the tower. The leader sighed heavily and finally sent the servant back. There was no point in worrying about one pathetic aristocrat. Cedric believed that Damien had come here to certain death, since the enemies were many times superior to him, but he greatly underestimated the guy. Damien took another elixir from his pocket, which instantly increases the user's strength and endurance, and drank it down. A powerful stream of energy like lightning pierced his body. He was ready for battle. Damien ran past the horde of thugs and cut them in half. At this time, a mysterious trinity was rushing through the city, from which magic was oozing in all directions. They sensed that something was wrong near the Black Snake Tower. Hearing that the noise of the battle in the courtyard had stopped, Cedric went out onto the balcony to see what had happened. He had a bad feeling, and for good reason. Damien had dealt with his main army of mercenaries in a matter of minutes. Could it really be that he alone caused all the trouble here? The man frowned and asked the servant if this guy was the Damien Haxon he knew. The servant confirmed it. Rumors said he was a viscount's worthless son. Cedric never imagined he was so capable. Since the brown-haired man has already reached them, does this mean that the dark magician he sent was also removed? After pondering some thoughts in his head, Cedric ran back into the tower. Although Damien had dealt with the mainstream of warriors, that was not all. There were several wizards on the roof of the house next to him who attracted his attention. One of them immediately shot a conjured ball of fire at the guy. Damien bravely dove into the fire, not fearing harm to himself. His self-confidence made the sorcerer laugh. Did he really think he could do anything with a sword against a fire spell? But Damien used a secret move. Infinite Thunder Shadow Reveal. He successfully caught the movement of the fire with his blade, turned it with the blade, and directed it in the opposite direction. The fireball ricocheted straight into the roof of the house, followed by a loud explosion. Now he was definitely finished. Even the wizards, scorched by the explosion, were already defeated. Now it's time to find out who this so-called Black Snake boss is. But Damien didn't have time to do this, because at that very moment, someone attacked him from behind. The guy jumped back, and the warrior who wanted to hit him with his fist rushed past. They stood face to face and looked each other over quickly and scrutinizingly. The enemy's aura is so thick that it tingles Damien's skin. The knight, shrouded in fog, confessed to the boy that he'd been wondering who the scoundrel who'd caused the unrest was. Apparently, he was in the right place. Damien, having studied him, came to the conclusion that in front of him was most likely an official knight. After the Black Viper team was defeated, Robert called upon a squad of soldiers responsible for maintaining public order to help. The governor appeared behind the guy and angrily asked Haxon how he dared to cause such a disturbance in the city center. He, Sebastian Baker, would make sure he received the punishment he deserved for disturbing the peace. Damien tried to find out the reason for his detention, but Sebastian tactlessly interrupted him. And he said that Damien allegedly not only tried to take the life of Cedric, whom he called a good businessman, but also killed dozens of his innocent workers. Cedric's smile widened with satisfaction. He knew he should have been jailed according to the law, but it wasn't for nothing that he'd secured the support of influential people. The cheeky boy even benefited from this situation. Now he at least knows who the boss of the Black Snakes is. Damien laughed in the governor's face and said that if he thought Cedric was kind and innocent, he was a fool. He confidently said that he had nothing to fear, because he had not committed any crime, unlike the one mentioned above in the conversation. The governor frowned. He said he'd sincerely wanted to be lenient about Damien's outburst, but Damien had left him no choice. So he ordered Sir Robert and his men to deal with the offender. Robert introduced himself to the boy and ordered him to put his gun down and not resist arrest unless he wanted to get hurt. But even then, he didn't see a grain of fear in the guy's eyes, so he asked if he was that brave or stupid. Haxon looked at him askance and said he was just very confident. The knight's patience ran out. He activated his deep mana supply and struck Damien's spot with his glowing sword. Damien managed to jump back, but thought that fighting the knight, given his current level, would be difficult. Now he needs to at least hold out until the right moment comes to counterattack. When Robert almost punched Damien in the face, he managed to cover himself with his arms crossed. The momentum of the blow threw Damien back several meters, but he did a somersault in flight, thanks to which he landed squarely on his feet. He tried to fend off the attack as best he could, but the knight still managed to hit him very hard. Damien looked back hopefully, as if he was waiting for someone. The knight noticed this and, attacking again, asked who the guy was waiting for. Suddenly, an unfamiliar figure appeared in the meadow and protected Damien from the man's blow. Robert's axe flew out of his hands and stuck in the ground behind him. Robert trembled slightly with fear and anger, barely able to control his emotions. He asked Damien's partner to introduce himself. The mysterious figure opened her cloak and removed her hood. It was a beautiful, strong girl in armor. The knights recognized who it was. The girl standing before them was a paladin. This was what Damien was waiting for. He turned around and saw another person, whom he asked why they were taking so long. It was Victor. He and two other cloaked paladins ran up to Damien. The boy tried so hard to arrive as quickly as possible that he was covered in sweat, but he was glad that he arrived just in time. The arrival of the paladins did not bode well for the Black Snake Society. Cedric glared at them, not wanting the church involved in this matter. Damien grabbed Victor by the cheeks and said that he should have run even faster. He barely managed to stand in front of them. However, the main thing is that Victor did what his master asked. Victor gave him a thumbs up and said that everything went well. A few hours ago, he arrived at the city church on Damien's orders. The church ministers were saying prayers at that very time. Victor asked for the attention of a girl who was kneeling before the altar. The boy looked very worried and tired. His sister asked him what had happened and where he was rushing to in such a hurry. The servant handed her a bag with the severed head of the magician and a note that the master had asked him to give. The boy said that this was evidence from his master that someone was working with a dark magician. This interested the girl very much, so she asked the boy to look at these things closer. First, he gave her a terrifying notebook, and only from it did it become clear that they were dealing with dark energy. She was also very interested in the symbol that was printed in the corner of the cover. Then she grabbed the bag with even more interest and looked inside. She pulled her head out of it, not at all disgusted, and was rather pleased with what she saw, while Victor was still frightened by her appearance. Finally, the girl found one of the leaders of Yulan, named Agito. Then she took off her church clothes and asked Victor where his master was, who had told him to deliver this to her. So Victor brought her to the castle. The girl was very impressed by Damien's actions. She thanked him for his help and said that now the church would sort everything out. Damien said that he would not stand in the way of the church and left these scoundrels to them. She bowed and thanked the young man again. Damien smiled. Luckily, everything was going as he planned. Holy church, they live their lives in service to God. They are infinitely merciful and generous to the common people. But when it comes to heretics and demons, they will not hesitate for a second and will throw their souls into the sacred flame. Yes, they may be considered a group of fanatics, but they deserve respect. The vanguard of this church is the paladins, and fortunately, these powerful paladins are now on his side. The girl loudly announced to the entire street that she had received a report about a man who had signed a contract with a wanted dark mage and was currently in land work. Passers-by who witnessed this scene began to whisper in fear. Who could possibly have gotten involved with such dangerous, low-moral people? Paladin announced that while they searched for everyone involved, the church would take control of the city. The governor was outraged, because Landwork was a city granted self-government by the kingdom. The church could not rule the city while he was there. The girl told the governor that the eradication of heretics was the will of God, and that the power of the church was above the power of the kingdom. When he said that he would officially protest against it, the girl became even more excited. And she stated that Sebastian and his knight were the main suspects, so they had even less right to argue with her. She pointed her finger at Cedric and proclaimed that this man was hiding and supporting the Dark Wizard. The mere defense of such a person is already sufficient grounds for suspicion and punishment. The governor was furious. He hadn't even known his comrade was collaborating with such people, so he'd set them all up. The paladins had direct evidence, so it was useless for Cedric to deny his involvement. She showed them the Dark Wizard's diary, which described every item that Cedric Walker had purchased for the sorcerer. And they will have no trouble confirming that the records are true when they contact the stores that sell the products in question. Cedric tried to defend himself, to lie that there was a misunderstanding, but the paladins still ordered his arrest. They will find out everything and confirm it during the investigation. The paladins grabbed Cedric and his friends and put strong handcuffs on them. Before the governor was taken away, he noticed the satisfied face of Damien, who was standing nearby. From his reaction, the man guessed that the guy had planned all of this. But nothing could be done about it. Sebastian was seriously scared. They couldn't catch him like that. He had no idea what these fanatics would do to him. Cedric turned to Sir Robert and asked him if he was really going to give up just like that. He didn't answer, but only pretended to walk calmly, expecting punishment. And when the paladins relaxed a little, he rushed towards his battle axe with all his might. He grabbed the handle and immediately filled his body with mana to become stronger. He raised his weapon and tried to attack the girl first before running away. Damien didn't even intervene and defend her because he knows the man is making a mistake. The blow from the axe missed the girl and crumbled the asphalt. She took advantage of the moment and struck Sir Robert from the side. Her fist magically pierced the knight and left a jagged wound in his chest. A hole appeared through his body that was incompatible with life. The man died instantly, and his lifeless body fell at her feet. Anyone who disobeys the will of God will be punished. That is her motto. With their only protector defeated, Cedric lost all hope of salvation. The governor struggled, tried to break free, but to no avail. Damien and Victor stood to the side, gloating over the defeated men. Contrary to the rumors, he turned out to be a complete non-entity. Thanks to the paladins, everything was settled. Although Damien assumed the girl was very strong, she turned out to be even stronger. Judging by her sacred power, there is a high probability that she is a disciple of the Azure Flame. Azure Flame Brigantine is the most powerful person in the church, one of the 5 great saints. He is famous for executing a large number of heretics. After finishing with the criminals, the girl approached Damien and praised him for his work in eliminating Officer Yulan. For this act, the church acknowledged the fact of his assistance and will not accuse him of anything. Damien honestly admitted that he didn't quite understand what she meant. But the girl demonstrated that she had figured out Damien. He had only called the church to cover up his attack on the Black Snake. Damien apologized to her, just in case his actions had offended them. The dark mage had not only cursed his territory, but had even tried to harm his family. The girl was touched by his words. She calmly said that, given the circumstances, she could not hold him accountable. She turned out to be much more flexible in her reasoning than the public believes. The girl promised Damien that the reward for Agito's head would be paid soon. As Damien suspected, there was a bounty on this man. So for his elimination, he would also receive 1,000 gold coins. But the guy said he wanted to get something else instead of the agreed amount. He would like to learn one of the mana cultivation techniques belonging to the church. The girl was surprised. The guy was strong enough to take out an entire gang on his own, but he needed their equipment? The point is that after the battle with the dark magician, Damien realized that he was lucky enough to win back then only due to his power. But to defeat even more powerful enemies in the future, he needs more. On his way, he will encounter many more powerful monsters against which the power of God will no longer be enough, especially when the time comes to meet Dorgo. He needs to reach a higher level. He definitely needs the mana training techniques used by knights, techniques more advanced than what he studied. Damien told the girl that he had only learned basic techniques and was asking her for a reward of this kind in order to master something more complex. The paladin sensed the powerful mana coursing through Damien. If he's not lying about his basic techniques, he possesses exceptional talent. He also has the determination to get rid of heretics without hesitation. After thinking for a bit, the girl said that she was ready to offer him an alternative reward. And she asked if he was by any chance interested in becoming a paladin. Damien confidently replied no. This disappointed the girl, but no matter. She sadly asked why the guy wasn't attracted to this. Becoming a paladin is the greatest honor bestowed by God, allowing one to punish evil in his name. The girl got angry and asked if he even knew how hard it was to get this position. Unfortunately, Damien never had a shred of faith. Besides, he has no interest in living in a church like a dog. In order not to upset the girl too much, Damien gently answered her that he was supposedly not yet worthy of the love of God himself. For now, he wishes to travel the world and follow the path of the Lord as his humble follower. Surprisingly, Damien managed to make a good impression, and the girl's spirits perked up again. She happily rattled off that she agreed to fulfill Damien's request and would also always wait for him at the church if he changed his mind. And she would like to ask him for something else. First, she finally introduced herself and said that her name was Agnes. She was the first student of the Azure Flame. Just as Damien thought. The only surprising thing is that she's also his very first student. Damien asked her to leave him to finish another piece of his business here. He walked up to Cedric, who was sitting chained on the ground, waiting for the knights to finally take him away. Damien took it and kicked the man in the stomach with all his might to vent his anger. He said contemptuously that the leader was so fat that it was as if he was kicking a pillow. And then he went and kicked him in the face because the man was attempting to kill him and his family. Now he is finally completely satisfied and contented. Victor approached him and quietly asked, "Is this really the end?" The guy nodded at him with a smile. But every ending is a new beginning. Sometime later, the bright sun illuminates the house of the Marquis of Lionbloom. Erwin's father, the Marquis of the Apple Kingdom, Holland Lionbloom, bursts into his room. The guy is lying under a thick blanket on his bed and shaking violently. The man walked up to him, shook him by the shoulders, and asked what the hell had happened while he was gone. But the father wasn't angry with his beloved child. His cheerful child was now shaking in terror. The angry parent wanted to know who did this to his boy. One of the guards said that it was Damien from the Viscounty of Haxon. He defeated Erwin with just a fork, hitting him and wounding him with the sharp teeth. In irritation, Holland threw the first thing he could get his hands on onto the floor. 2 vases standing on the table. They shattered into pieces. Holland is perplexed. How dare this vile Haxon touch his son? The Marquis ordered that men be sent immediately to the Haxon mansion and drag him to the Lionbloom mansion like a guilty dog. Once the arrest of the offenders had been completed, Agnes and her henchmen arrived at the Haxon mansion. The paladins were met by Damien's parents, and the girl introduced herself to them. The parents respectfully welcomed her into their home, although they were quite surprised by what was happening. In fact, the father was angry because his eldest son not only created problems behind his back, but also brought fanatics into the house. In order to investigate the case of the heretics, Damien allowed the paladins to stay in his house for a while. Paul's negative mood quickly vanished when he saw that in return, the paladins brought with them a whole bag of coins. The happy parents left with the money, and Agnes expressed her gratitude to Damien for allowing them to stay at his estate. When the girl said she had a favor to ask of him, Damien didn't expect her to come to his house, but he couldn't refuse. Suddenly, Agnes said that she actually had one more request for the guy, and this time, she needs Damien himself. And the parents are right there, listening attentively to their son's conversation with the girl. Like all parents, they are very interested in their son's communication with a beautiful girl, automatically considering her as a potential daughter-in-law. Agnes gave Damien the monocultivation manuals he'd requested. She'd specially selected them for him. One of the manuals included sword techniques, so Damien had a complete set for learning this technique. One book he received was called Destructive Sword Technique, the other, Destructive Energy Technique. He had never encountered such books in his previous life. Agnes said they were quite difficult to obtain because there was a lot of opposition from the church to their distribution. In the end, she had to rely on her teacher's authority. When she told him about Damien, he said the boy was exactly the chosen one the church needed. So she asked him her question again. Could he reconsider his decision to become a paladin? She grabbed the guy's hand emotionally, but he took it from the girl's grip. Damien apologized and said he still couldn't agree to it. A look of disappointment flashed in her eyes. With difficulty controlling her temper, she said she understood everything, and reminded him that if he changed his mind, he could confidently contact her. Damien wasn't really bothered by this. As he'd thought, Agnes was a total fanatic. Therefore, he did not regret his refusal to her at all. After the conversation, the paladins went to the Dark Mage's cave, which Damien told them about. They carefully examined the cave and came across many curious things. Something about this place seemed very suspicious to them. Agito is a high-ranking member of Yulan, who has escaped the church's persecution numerous times. He is part of a cursed school, meaning he is weaker in direct combat. But even so, could such a powerful mage die at the hands of a local nobleman? The paladins who were exploring the cave were puzzled that Lady Agnes had not mentioned anything about it. The boys, although worried, decided that they needed to first sort out the investigation and only then turn their attention to Haxan. But Agnes overheard their conversation. She came in and said they could trust Damien. She understands the source of their doubts, but she knows for sure that Damien did not lie. Moreover, they know exactly how the guy did it. He himself admitted to them that he simply dodged his attack and cut off his head at the right moment. The paladins asked if Agnes really believed that Damien killed him by accident. She said she began to doubt it the day his servant brought the wizard's severed head. So she kept her distance and observed from afar instead of directly interrogating. Damien single-handedly fought off dozens of mercenaries without sustaining a single scratch. He completely defeated them. But here's what was most shocking during this battle. He reflected a fireball, or in other words, a magic spell. Moreover, he used an ordinary sword for this, which greatly surprised the paladins, who did not even know that this was possible. Agnes had heard that those who had reached the level of a sword master were able to block all types of attacks, including magical ones. She certainly doesn't claim that Damien is a master swordsman, but it is clear that he is an outstanding warrior. Although her main reason for coming here was to pursue Yulan, in truth, she also wanted to take Damien along on the journey to meet her teacher. So she asked her comrades to put aside their doubts about him and focus on the investigation. They obediently continued their work and did not mention the topic again. Meanwhile, the Knights of the Lionbloom family were, as the Marquis had ordered, sent to the lands of Haxan. The first knight was named Olpus. He was an apprentice knight of the Lionbloom house. The second apprentice knight was named Lavender, and he had never been to these parts before. But their main thing gave the knights themselves goosebumps. His name was Garrick, and he is an official knight, the strongest of them. Their journey was long, but they finally reached the coveted Haxan mansion. Garrick asked the younger one to repeat what task the Marquis had sent them here for. Opus recounted that they had been ordered to arrest Damien Haxan. Garrick, still imagining the guy based on rumors, said he would just catch the trash. But this alone will be enough to compensate for the shame experienced by young Master Irwin and the Marquis. On the way to the mansion, the knights came across an old man and called out to him. The three knights looked quite terrifying, but the old man felt safe on his native soil. He told them that he was a resident of Viscount Haxon's mansion, for which he paid with his head, simply by falling into the hands of such cretins at the wrong time. Garrick cut it off because he thought too much of himself, and he considered it a grave crime that the man did not bow his head when he saw the Lionbloom family coat of arms. The knights' apprentices noticed that the old man was actually blind, but they did not tell the captain about it. Suddenly, Garrick had an idea. He turned to his comrades and with a mad grin said that he had a brilliant idea. When they arrive at the Haxon mansion, they will drag Damien outside. And along the way, they'll kill everyone they come across. And the first to fall, unfortunately, was Victor. The paladins dealt with the cave fairly quickly and did a good job. It's just a shame that due to the collapse of the scene, they weren't able to gather enough information. While they were making their way through the forest to the house, they noticed a strange glow in one of the clearings and went over to take a look. Damien sat in the middle of the meadow, practicing his mana control. He had created a wondrous energy field around himself. The paladins' mouths dropped open in amazement. They didn't know what they were witnessing, but it looked incredibly beautiful and impressive. Damien learned the destructive energy technique Agnes gave him so quickly, but it was supposed to be a cultivation method, allowing someone who has reached the highest level to absorb surrounding mana, but to reach the peak in just a few hours is amazing. After finishing his exercise, Damien opened his eyes and was surprised to find a real team of fans gathered around him. He grabbed the books and asked Agnes if they had finished their investigation yet. She said confused that yes, and noticed that the guy had made some progress in his business. Damien was a swordmaster in his past life, so sword techniques had no value to him, but this cultivation method was extremely useful. The destructive energy technique was created to offset the heavy mana consumption of the destructive sword technique. This allows for faster mana accumulation. Noticing Agnes's still intense, admiring gaze, Damien tried to divert attention from himself and reminded her that it was time to return to dinner. But suddenly, it was as if an electric shock struck him. He felt a thirst for blood emanating from someone. So Damien, while still far from the estate, realized that the saboteur had arrived. He sternly told Agnes that he had urgent business to attend to, so he would head to the mansion first. He ordered the paladins to return at their own pace. After these words, Damien rushed off into the distance with lightning speed and incredible speed. This created another reason for Agnes to admire him, his enormous speed and endurance. Damien runs so fast using so little mana. He must be concentrating mana within himself with genius precision. How high is its limit? By the time Damien had already gotten close to the estate, the knights had managed to grab Victor and beat him. The poor boy could no longer stand on his feet, but the knights continued to kick him and hit him with their fists wherever they could. And all because he refused to show them where Damien was, thinking that they would harm him. Paul ran out of the mansion at the noise to figure out what was going on. Seeing this disgrace, he ordered the knights to stop. They realized that in front of them was none other than Viscount Haxon. The man ran up to the servant in fear to check if he was still alive after such abuse. He shouted angrily at the men, "How can knights attack a civilian? Where is their honor?" But Garrick's conscience didn't bother him at all. He said that compared to what the Haxon had done to the Lionbloom family, it was nothing. The knight announced to Paul that his master demanded that Damien Haxon be brought to the mansion. He said that if they gave the boy back without any scandals, then neither the servants nor their lands would suffer anymore. Paul could tell from the man's face that Garrick was lying. Even if he gave up his son, they would still turn the family mansion into a sea of flames. Paul became so angry that his veins bulged and said that he would never give up his son. The knight asked Paul again if he was sure he wouldn't regret his decision. He said he was, and thus left the knights no choice but to destroy everything until Damien came out. Paul tried to reason with the knights and come to an agreement with them, but he did not manage to do anything, because at that moment he appeared in the yard. Damien, emitting unstoppable streams of terrifying aura, headed straight towards the knights. Even Garrick tensed up at the unexpected sight. When had the guy even managed to show up here? They didn't immediately recognize the guy because, in their minds, Damien Haxon was completely different. But an even greater shock came the next moment, when the knights realized that they could not move at all and seemed to be stuck in time. Damien approached his family at this point. He confirmed that his father was okay, but Victor wasn't so lucky. He was alive, but badly maimed and unconscious from multiple wounds and bruises. Damien said the knights were extremely lucky. If Victor hadn't been born with such a strong body, he would have died from such a beating. And in that case, Damien would have beaten those three to death on the spot. At that moment, Garrick realized it was Damien standing before them. He said the boy was brave enough to challenge the Marquis, so it turns out he's just a madman. Or maybe he feels confident because he defeated the nobleman using some pathetic trick? Garrick directed his subordinates towards Damien and ordered them to break the boy's legs and force him to fall prostrate before them. They simultaneously pounced on Damien, who didn't even bat an eyelid. He dispassionately grabbed one of the knights by the arm, stopping the movement of his sword, and then the second warrior lingered somewhere behind. Haxon took the guy's arm and twisted it until it crunched, so that he let out a loud cry of pain. Damien kept wanting to release the accumulated mana using his destructive energy technique. Now they were in trouble. Lavender, struck by several deadly blows at once, flew far to the side. Before Opus could even blink, Damien had kicked him in the jaw and thrown him high into the air. Two of the three knights are already lying on the ground, swallowing dust after their defeat. Victor had just managed to come to his senses and already praised the gentleman for holding up well as always. Damien smiled softly at him. This Victor really is an interesting guy. Garrick became wary and dismounted from his horse. Wasn't young Master Irwin the victim of the brown-haired man's cheap tricks? However, the leader still can't understand one thing. How could a scoundrel like Haxon suddenly acquire such skills? Damien sternly replied that the knight didn't need to know. But from this, the knight drew his own conclusions, and suddenly said that he understood everything. And then he declared that the brown-haired man was not Damien Haxon, thus proving that he actually didn't understand anything. Damien winced at such stupidity. What kind of nonsense was he talking? Garrick irritably ordered the supposedly false Damien not to lie to him. Thinks he didn't realize it was a trap set by the war dogs to stop the Lionbloom family from prospering. Most likely the brown-haired man is an imposter who was hired to humiliate Irwin, and along with him, the good name of the Lionbloom family. Damien sighed heavily. The man turned out to be even more stupid than he suspected. Garrick's face was distorted with anger and hatred, making him look even more ugly than before. Garrick admitted his opponent looked skilled, but his luck had run out. He concentrated a powerful mana field around himself. Once Damien gets into his small range, the knight will cut him down with ease. At least that's what Garrick thought, but Damien stopped the other's blade with his own with astonishing ease. As expected from Lionbloom, they sent a full-fledged knight this time, which amused Damien but didn't frighten him. The guy threw the enemy back several meters. Garrick froze in surprise. How could the brown-haired man have parried his blow? But the failure didn't upset him. Considering it a mere coincidence, he once again vented his anger on Haxon. But the boy fought them off so quickly that it was impossible to follow his hand movements. He even teased the man, saying he was too slow. Tired of the redhead's endless, useless blows, it was Damien's turn to attack. He attacked the captain like a hurricane, and he received wound after wound because he could not keep up with Damien's movements. When the man was confused, the guy took it and kicked him in the face with great force. The man fell and rolled on the ground, moaning from severe pain throughout his body. He knelt on the ground and tried to come to his senses. Damien looked at him with a maddened look and declared that it was only for Victor. With difficulty, the knight got to his feet and decided to use another blow of his. The absolute technique, the mighty sword of the lion's speed. Cloned blades flew towards Damien from all sides, like the tenacious paws of a predator. Damien lunged and with pinpoint accuracy identified the original sword and struck it right at the tip. The enemy's iron sword blade shattered into many small pieces, and the spell around it dissipated. The sword fell apart in a surprising way, and Garrick's mouth opened in amazement. Damien took advantage of this and cut off the man's right hand so that he did not have time to realize anything until he felt unbearable pain. To cope with the injury, Garrick conjured a high-temperature flame on his palm and cauterized the wound so as not to die from pain and blood loss. At that moment, the victor's sword was pressed to his face. The fair-haired man admitted that Damien had won and begged for mercy. Damien told the knight he was a fool, but he really was the Viscount's son. He should have begged him for mercy sooner, but now it was too late. He contacted the Haxon family and turned Damien's personal servant into an ugly, beaten boy. The knight, like a cornered animal, began to apologize endlessly because he had no other choice. Damien chuckled and asked if the man still didn't understand who he needed to apologize to. Then the knight raised his head and noticed with horror that Paul and Victor were standing above him, one with a bat in his hands and the other with a sword. Damien then provided them with knights so that they too could vent their anger and take revenge. Victor didn't want to stop, but Damien asked him to, because in a little while the knights would die, and they didn't need that. But Damien did not object to cutting off the frightened knight's second limb. But the boy's father stopped them and said that enough was enough. The knight crawled on his knees to Paul and also apologized to him for the disrespect shown to him. Paul declared that an apology alone was not enough. If his son hadn't been strong enough, the entire estate would have suffered. Their entire territory would have been destroyed, and Damien would have been dragged off to the Marquis's house, and it's scary to even imagine the torture they would have inflicted on him. Then Garrick literally began to bang his head on the ground and beg them to finally let the knights go. It's not like Damien actually intended to kill them. If he finished off the knights, his relationship with the Lion Blooms would completely fall apart. Alone, Damien would fight the Marquis's family without hesitation, but for the sake of his family, he must restrain himself. However, if he simply lets the offenders go, they will surely come for revenge soon. What should he do? Suddenly, Sir Damien heard a familiar voice calling him. The paladins finally returned from the forest. Agnes asked him in fear what had happened. Then it suddenly dawned on Damien. The girl could be useful this time too. He told her in detail about what had happened, now and in the not-so-distant past. She said that if Damien was worried about it, she could help. Thanks to the Haxon family, one of Yulan's officers was successfully killed, which allows them to form an alliance. This ensures the Haxons a strong relationship with the church and security. In this case, their family could avoid a crisis. Father approved of the idea, and so did Victor. Damien looked at her with pleading, sweet eyes, and then asked the girl to keep her word. She succumbed to his charms, and then, to himself, Damien was slyly glad that he had secured the support of such influential allies. The girl stepped away from Damien, embarrassed. There was no doubt about the security of the Union. Then Damien turned to the knights and asked if they had heard what had just happened, and he ordered the boys to report this to the Lion Blooms, so that they would not dare to meddle in these lands. And if they try to attack the Haxons again, the wrath of the church will fall upon them. Damien looked at the knight with his demonic, terrifying gaze, and the knights were unable to squeak anything against him. As soon as he let them go, the enemies began to run, their heels flashing. However, despite Victor's joy, Damien felt that he could not yet breathe freely. Paul said they now needed to decide what to do next. A family meeting was needed. So Haxon Sr. gathered all the family members, as well as Agnes, in his office. He announced that the main topic of the meeting was their feud with Lion Bloom. They had to finally decide what to do about it. Abel asked his father, "Isn't the church already protecting them? Why do they even need to resolve this feud?" Paul told his son that they could not hope for full-fledged church intervention. Louise is right. The church isn't deeply involved in the affairs of the nobility. Besides, the Lion Bloom's power doesn't rest entirely on military might alone. If they want, they can destroy their small noble family in many ways. Right now, the most realistic options are to either pay them off or seek protection from a more noble family. However, Agnes suddenly intervened in the dialogue and stated that there was another way. She again reminded him that Sir Damien could become a paladin. It would solve many of their family's problems, but Damien remained opposed. He announced this to his family, who just stared at him. Paul looked confused and said that since Damien was unwilling, that option would not be considered. But then suddenly, Abel got angry. He jumped up from the table and shouted that his father was making two hasty decisions. After all, if Damien becomes a paladin, then all this mess will really end. Although it had nothing to do with Abel, he advised his father to simply force Damien to act for the benefit of the family. While his sons bickered and argued, Paul sat quietly and thought about everything that had been said. Then he looked menacingly at Abel and ordered him to sit down at the table. They had guests, so he should behave decently. The boy clicked his tongue in irritation, but obeyed his father's order. Paul admitted that Abel was right. Damien had provoked the conflict with the Lionbloom family, but the blame wasn't entirely his. Lionbloom's second son had lustful intentions towards Louise, for which he paid the price. In fact, Damien protected Louise from the plans of the Marquis's second son instead of her helpless father. So a proud Paul stood up from the table and praised Damien for it. He did a great job. Damien never imagined his father would perceive it all this way, and he's sincerely grateful that his son stood up to those who insulted their family. Then Damien suddenly changed his mind and said that he would do it, become a paladin. But the father said he'd take care of the problem himself. He couldn't put everything on his son's shoulders. He should behave like a father. At this moment, their conversation was interrupted by a servant who entered the hall, and he said that a man from the Gold Pixie Duchy had arrived. It turns out that the young gentleman had borrowed money using the family's wheat fields as collateral, and the payment date had already passed. The father's gaze immediately hardened, and the grip on his son's shoulder became anything but encouraging. The father grabbed his son by the collar, and then the usual thing began, scolding his son for yet another reckless act. Father's screams were so loud that they could be heard from every corner of the house, but everyone had already gotten used to it. Damien had to go down to the guests, after all. He barely remembers the man he lent money to. A lot of time had passed since their last meeting, and manager Olin Demish came because the date for repaying the debt they had agreed on had arrived. He asked the boy if he would like to use his family's land as collateral, and it was clear that was the option he wanted Damien to choose. With every sweet word spoken, Olin coaxed him to go further. Cursing his past self, Damien asked them to remind him how much money he owed them. The guy replied that Damien had borrowed 200 gold coins, and with interest, it turned out that he owed them 300. It was so long ago that Damien doesn't even remember why he took the money, but it's clear that his family doesn't have that kind of money now. At this rate, his entire family will be thrown out on the street due to bankruptcy. Olin reminded them that if Damien did not pay them the money today, then all the land he had put up as collateral would become the property of their society. When they signed the documents, the man told Damien that the deposit was just a formality. But now he lied, saying that the Duke had ordered all the debts to be collected. Regardless of who owed them, the nobility or the common people. Or maybe the guy wants to say that he has no money. Damien had to admit that he hadn't had time to prepare for the payment. After these words, Olin felt his superiority and sprawled out on the sofa like he owned the place. He said that in that case, Damien shouldn't have borrowed in the first place. He snapped his fingers, calling the thug guards to him. It turns out that they will have to take the money using their own methods. Olin knew all along the boy wouldn't be able to pay, and despite liking money, he enjoys the desperation of his debtors most. He loves to watch arrogant nobles grovel before him. He wondered what kind of face young Haxon would show him when he begged for mercy. Olin, like a pervert, enjoyed the sweet anticipation of this moment. Meanwhile, the Haxon family sat restlessly in the next room, waiting for news. Marilda asked her husband to sit down and finally rest, otherwise he would soon make a hole in the floor with his restless walking around the room. The father clutched his head in concern and said he simply couldn't remain calm in this situation. Their family could be destroyed. Marilda said she trusted Damien, who said he'd figure everything out. She just had to trust him and wait. Louise supported her mother and said that he never let them down when he decided to stand up for something. But my father said it was only because of his excellent swordsmanship. Negotiation skills and combat skills are two different things. But during the negotiations in the next room, Damien used precisely the second method. He took and roughly hit one of the guards in the face against the table, greatly frightening Olin with his harshness. The only thing that worried Damien about all that had happened was that his father would scold him for the broken parquet flooring, since they had just recently done some renovations. The second guard grabbed his sword and also attacked the impudent boy. But Damien managed to grab his face with his hand before he could hit the young man. The guy asked irritably, "How dare he point a sword at a nobleman?" Now their fight could be justified as ordinary self-defense on Damien's part. Having finished with the guards, Damien approached Olin, who obediently sat down opposite him. Damien told him that he could not pay the agreed amount of money right now, so he smiled and suggested that the man repay his debt in a different way. Poor Olin had to agree to any conditions so that the aristocrat would not cripple him too. The next morning at the Hexen estate, Abel confessed to his father that he was grief-stricken because justice lost to cruelty and Damien got away with it again. Paul asked him to stop being dramatic and instead cheer up his older brother before leaving. Although Paul agreed to this reluctantly, he is still worried about whether his son's plan will work. Agnes looked at the guy with disappointment when she also went out to see him off and expressed her regret that their paths were already diverging. Damien approached her and sincerely thanked her for her help. She said that their investigation was coming to an end, so the paladins planned to return to the church tomorrow. They both bowed to each other and blessed each other for a good journey. And Agnes reminded him once again that Damien could still change his mind. But he wasn't going to. The farewells were over, so Damien approached the carriage, where Victor was already waiting for him with his things. The guy climbed inside and was glad that the carriage was quite spacious and comfortable. Olin obediently sat opposite and promised to make sure that nothing during the trip would cause Damien discomfort. Damien praised him for his good mood and suggested that in that case they have lobster for lunch. The carriage prepared for departure. Victor looked out of the window and signaled to the coachman to drive off. The horses neighed, reared up, and prepared for the road. The carriage moved off, and Damien smiled in anticipation of an interesting trip. They're heading to the Gold Pixie family's house. The journey took them some time, but when they reached their destination, the Coxswains were pleasantly surprised by the appearance of the mansion. This is without a doubt the home of the richest family in the entire kingdom. Olin told Damien that he had already notified the Duke of his arrival, so the boy could go inside straight away. Despite his outward politeness, the man was already silently cursing the young man who, during the trip, had forced him to work more like a dog than a servant. Out loud, he wished Damien luck with his plan, but silently he wished him death and the plan to fail. Damien left Victor to wait outside for now and headed inside the mansion. He found the Duke, as expected, in his study. The Duke of the Apple Kingdom was named Adam Goldpixie. He knew Damien as the troublemaker of the Haxon family. To be honest, Damien is already tired of everyone he meets on his way laughing at him. The Duke asked the boy what brought him here, and on what matter he had come. Damien said he had borrowed money from the Godpixie family's creditors, and the payment deadline had come. He's sorry, but he doesn't have any money right now, so he'd like to ask if he can pay his debt another way. As payment, Damien offered the Duke to defeat the Lionbloom family. This greatly surprised not only the Duke, but also his closest servants. The Duke concluded that Damien had heard the latest news, and the guard knight, Jael Ramich, agreed. Everyone in the Apple Kingdom knows this big news. A gold mine was recently discovered on the border of Lionbloom and Gold Pixie. Two families, who had never gotten along, agreed to a duel between low-class knights to gain a monopoly on a gold mine. Damien already knows the outcome of this fight, namely, a crushing victory for the Lionbloom family. Thanks to the acquired gold, they rapidly expanded their forces. On the other hand, the God Pixies lost their influence. Ultimately, if Damien helps the Duke win, he will not only pay off the debt, but also keep the Lionbloom family in check. The Duke noticed the boy was full of ambition. Was it true he had defeated Lionbloom's second son? And even destroyed the organization in landwork? Damien nodded and confirmed that it was not just rumors. The Duke found this quite tempting. He was just looking for a knight to take part in the duel. Damien declared himself the perfect candidate. Who else could take on the Lionbloom's eldest son? Adam noted that everyone knew the elder Lionbloom as a genius. Would it be possible to bring him down to Haxon? The guy recognized Lionbloom's talent, but he was much more confident in his own skills. But then one of the Duke's close knights intervened. He asked the master not to believe the boy, as rumors tend to be exaggerated. He's also confident that it won't be Damien, but Miss Chelsea, who will bring the perfect candidate. This guy's name is Ernst Howitz, a middle-class knight. Miss Chelsea has been away for a month, searching for the perfect knight to battle Michael Lionbloom. She should be back soon. She always passed Adam's tests perfectly, so he's confident she won't let him down this time either. The Duke was a little taken aback. Both men presented valid arguments. Damien glared at Ernst. Why did he even interfere and ruin his impression of him? The Duke looked defiantly at Damien, waiting to see his reaction to what was happening. Then the brown-haired man decided to prove to the knights that they were very much mistaken about him. If they wish to prevail in this duel, they must choose Damien. Whoever returns with Miss Chelsea will not be as good. If they needed proof, Damien promised to block any absolute strike Ernst could throw. And if he manages to block Ernst's most impressive attack, then he will be able to prove his worth. Red asked permission to teach this self-confident guy a lesson. The Duke was very interested in this, and he allowed his subordinate to act. At that moment, they all descended into the arena to see who would win this dispute. Victor shouted from the stands that Damien's plan was to persuade the Duke, not to fight again. But he replied that this was now a form of persuasion. But, watching how the magical fire around the knight grew hotter with each passing second, Victor became seriously scared. Feeling a little bored, the Duke ordered Sir Howitz to begin. Before the battle, the knight allowed Damien to kneel and ask for forgiveness if he suddenly became frightened and did not want to get hurt. Damien yawned demonstratively in response and asked the knight to quickly get down to business. At that very second, an uncontrollable charge of energy gushed out from the knight in a huge wave in different directions. Noticing this, Damien thought that he had probably angered his opponent too much. He put all the magical powers that had accumulated in his body into his weapon and promised to make a hole in the boaster's sickening face. Damien expected nothing less from a middle-class knight. However, if he could simply understand where the knight was aiming, it wouldn't be difficult. The magic sword cut through the air and aimed its tip straight at Damien's body. A second before the collision, the guy realized that the blow could hit him right in the center of the chest. Therefore, he blocked the spear with his sword, but by inertia, he flew back from the powerful blow. The spear struck so hard that it broke Damien's sword into small pieces, and the tip still struck Damien. Dark red blood gushed from his chest, and he fell back. Everyone present froze in fear, not believing their eyes. However, despite the sudden attack, Damien withstood it and even remained standing on his feet. The Duke stared at the boy in shock, as did everyone else in the room. He kept his word. Damien smirked smugly and asked if that meant the candidate position was now his. Victor rushed toward the gentleman with a welcoming hug. He was genuinely scared for the boy, but very happy that he had won. Damien gently pushed the boy away and said that he was still in a little pain, but he was okay. The Duke also congratulated the young man on his victory. He had actually withstood Howitz's blow. Incredible! Adam was full of doubts about him, but the guy turned out to be capable. He really is something. The man solemnly announced that Damien Haxon had demonstrated his talent beyond measure. As promised, he was declared a candidate for the duel. Ernst tried to say something else, but the gentleman interrupted him, and he told him to stop arguing and ruining his good mood. The aristocrat's stern gaze shut him up. Ernst continued to rage inwardly. How did this happen? He was sure his attack would be successful. Damien noted that Ernst had a good reputation in the Duke's eyes. He was quite talented, but he had simply fought the wrong man today. Because Damien's level has already exceeded average in the last few years, but since only low-class knights can participate in a duel, Damien had to pretend, show incredible acting skills that would deceive anyone. In that short moment, if he hadn't used mana to block, Damien could have been seriously injured. The Duke noticed Damien examining the wound on his chest. The boy must have developed an internal wound, so the elder came closer and offered to help heal it. He activated the magic ring on his finger, which was an interdimensional tool, and created a small portal. From there, he took out a small gilded box. He opened it in front of Damien and said that it would be a gift from him. Inside the box were several balance pills. Adam paid the Alchemy Academy a large sum for them. Knights typically take these pills during training, but they are also effective for internal wounds. Damien thanked the man, who kindly said that he looked forward to his work. Haxon confidently replied that he would not disappoint him. The next morning, Damien had a good night's sleep and left his guest bedroom and went down to the training arena. The pill the Duke gave him was truly effective. His internal organs almost completely healed in just one night. He didn't have time to look around yesterday, but the duchy is full of good training weapons. With him, Damien can train and move forward. Suddenly, someone called him from behind, and the tone of this person was not the most friendly. Damien turned around and saw a boy. He looked confident enough, but was a head shorter than Damien. The brown-haired man asked the boy to introduce himself to him. The guy said his name was Pavel Bermond. He was a low-class knight of this estate. But they weren't alone. Two more boys, the knight's brothers, entered the room. All three were also chosen to take part in the upcoming duel. They were training outside yesterday, so they didn't get to meet Damien, and Pavel said he was very lucky about that. Like, if they were here, they would be the ones to teach the guy a lesson, instead of Sir Howitz. The self-confident guy announced that the duel with Lion Bloom was an important event, where the fate of the duchy was at stake, so Damien had no right to drag them down. If he understood everything, then let him get lost now with his ridiculous abilities, and not interfere with the knight's training. Damien chuckled and calmly stepped aside. He'd been curious about the talent of the knights in the duchy, and now he understood. Pavel prepared for training and stood in the starting position of the motionless Akalanada, thinking that he looked very brutal. But in fact, it was funny. One of the brothers who performed the secret movement of the Rising Phoenix also looked comical. They clashed in a confident training fight. Today is already their 981st battle. Who will win this time? The most inconvenient thing in this case was that both brothers already knew each other's techniques by heart. The elder brother cut the air with a wooden sword and hit Pavel on the forehead. And then he said in surprise that his brother apparently predicted his attack, and he allegedly deliberately blocked it with his forehead. The brother bowed to Pavel and said he felt like he'd learned a lot during the fight that day. Damien watched, surprised and puzzled. Then it was time for the other brother to fight Pavel. He was their leader and considered the strongest. The brothers naively believed that numerous training sessions, even with the same person, would give them something and that they would be able to show good results. Pavel took his sword and raised it into the sky. They, like musketeers, shouted their motto, "One for all and all for one." Damien's spirits were completely shattered. These idiots had so disappointed him with their stupidity and naivety that he'd already decided they were doomed in the coming battle. He told Victor that they would probably lose the duel. With idiots like these, Damien simply can't be sure of their victory. They think they're the strongest, but in reality, they're not developing at all. Meanwhile, the Duke was talking with his senior high-class knight, Gale. The old man wasn't bothered by this, but yesterday Damien refused to train with him because he said he wanted to train alone. It was easier for him. The Duke understood his desire, but he did not expect that the boy would refuse even the mentorship of Galo Rimich, a high-class knight. Adam was amused by this. Damien was revealing himself to him as a very interesting person. Adam also asked what the knight thought about him. Gal said Damien was an exceptional young man. He used his mana in a split second to block Howitz's shot. Not everyone could do that. The aristocrat asked then, what did he think their chances were in this duel? Would they be able to defeat Lion Bloom? The man said it was difficult to predict the outcome since there were only 3 people participating. Even if Damien did well, it wouldn't matter without the other 2 rounds. The Duke agreed. Their other knights needed to succeed. Gal said Sir Vincenzo was overseeing their training, so all should be well. So they thought there was nothing to worry about, but in reality, they had no idea how poor the level of training of the knights in the estate was. This is a huge problem that Damien did not foresee. The knights are not only stupid, but also in terrible shape. They only boast about their skill, which is completely non-existent. There is no choice. Damien will have to interfere with their training. He approached his brothers and called them to him. He put on weights and invited the guys to spar. Pavel proudly said that Damien was brave for challenging them even after seeing them in action. Pavel said that he accepted his challenge, to which Damien replied that he had offered to fight not only his main brother. He wants all 3 of the knights to attack him at the same time. The boys were surprised at first, but then they got really angry at this proposal and called Damien an arrogant brat. Nevertheless, they agreed to the fight. Although it goes against the knightly code of honor, when it comes to dealing with a mad dog, flogging is the best solution. The three of them simultaneously attacked Damien with their fists, and he didn't even bat an eyelid. With one blow, he scattered the boys in different directions, with such force that all three lost consciousness for a while. The first of the three to come to his senses was Pavel. Damien stood over him, surprised the boy had been lying there for so long. They were as pathetic as he'd thought. Victor told his master not to get into trouble, but he was only teaching the Duke's knights a lesson. The servant was surprised that these weaklings were real knights. Pavel focused on his memories. He recalled that 5 minutes ago, Damien had initially dodged the brothers' blows, and with one hand, he knocked out two of them at once, sending them into a knockout. And then he finished off Pavel, and after his blow, everything was like a fog. Just think, he crushed all three of them. At this point, the other two finally came to their senses. Pavel looked like his world had just been turned upside down. What was this monster in front of him? The guy sat down on the floor and excitedly asked Damien who trained him. Their teacher was Sir Sebastian Vincenzo, a knight of the middle class. Damien would have liked to advise them to stop training under him immediately, but he didn't want to cause any further conflict on this matter. Therefore, the brown-haired man only said that from that day on, they would spar with him every day after finishing training at Vincenzo's. Pavel awkwardly replied that if Sir Vincenzo saw bruises on them, he would suspect something was wrong. Damien promised that no matter how hard he hit them, there would not be a scratch left on their bodies, so there was no need to worry. Pavel noticed that they were indeed physically fine, so he asked how that was possible. Damien said mysteriously, and a little threateningly, that he had previously learned a very special way of beating people. Once upon a time, there lived a man who wandered the continent and retrained criminals. He was known as the character transformer. His method was simple. He beat people for an hour straight. If that didn't work, he doubled the duration. According to legend, the longest time he beat a man was 512 hours. During this process, the character changer began to feel pity for his bloodied victims and wondered, how can he beat someone without putting their life at risk? And so he reached the level of a master through a technique called the traceless strike. This is precisely what Damien used. It's a secret art that inflicts intense pain but leaves no visible trace. It took just one fight with Damien for the brothers to realize how weak and useless they truly were, and how much they had to learn. But no matter, they still have a whole month before the duel. During this time, Damien promised to turn them into at least somewhat useful warriors. The boys were a little scared at the prospect of training with this man, but they wanted to get stronger, so they didn't object. Damien told the brothers that they could now return to training. And at that moment, the Duke's assistant ran into the hall, needing Sir Damien. The guy said that the Duke urgently calls Damien to him. Since Lady Chelsea has finally returned to the mansion. As soon as she arrived, she went straight to greet the Duke. He was her father, and she was the eldest daughter. Fortunately, the girl returned from her trip safe and sound. A month passed, and the girl finally found a knight worthy of fighting in their duel. He came to his father's office with the girl to introduce himself. The tall, muscular man said that his name was Gilbermo Blackwing. He was a wild beast, a low-class knight. The Duke's knights began to whisper quietly behind his back. "Isn't this man a famous mercenary?" They heard that he took part in the War of the Kingdom of Eclairin and killed almost all the low-class knights. They say no low-class knight can defeat him. The Duke has also heard of him. The boy earned the title during the war and earned the nickname of a wild beast due to his brutal actions. Chelsea said the mercenary swore allegiance to her and promised to participate in the duel. He can definitely beat Michael Lionbloom. The other knights agreed that this was true. Michael certainly strives for perfection, but Sir Guillermo had already achieved it. The Duke said it was good news, but he was still having a hard time making a decision. He hadn't introduced him to his daughter yet, but recently a special guest had moved into their mansion. He appeared in the room just in time during their conversation, and Adam introduced them to Damien, the first candidate for the upcoming duel. Chelsea recalled that she asked her father to wait for her candidate, but her father said he did not promise to fulfill this request. Then she asked her father to change his decision regarding the representative. Adam said thoughtfully that he still needed time for this. Then the girl became truly angry. Her father shouldn't doubt her at all. But this was the first time she'd heard of Damien. Shouldn't they choose Sir Guillermo instead of some unknown knight? Guillermo looked at Damien proudly, confident that the Duke would be on his side. Adam thought clearly enough and agreed that his daughter's words made sense. But Sir Damien is strong enough to block Howitz's ultimate blow. Chelsea said, disgruntled, that her father simply didn't want to acknowledge her skills, and this was the perfect opportunity to just turn a blind eye to them again. She said that her father's actions never matched his words, and her father scolded her for such a dismissive tone. The girl apologized completely insincerely and said that she must have just been tired after her journey. The atmosphere in the office became very tense. It was obvious that the Gold Pixies were holding a grudge against each other. Adam dismissed his daughter's accusations and said he would first discuss the matter with others before making a decision. Suddenly, Guillermo burst out laughing very loudly, attracting everyone's attention. He asked the elder why they had to come to a decision through conversations. They were men, after all. Maybe he and Damien just need to fight each other, and the winner will then go on to the duel. The girl scolded her charge because she asked him not to interfere in family matters. But her father really liked this idea. They asked Damien's opinion, and the boy realized that the Duke was simply testing him again. He knew he'd have to use his skills to resolve the situation, but in this case, he said it wasn't necessary to resort to combat. Damien decided to take advantage of the opportunity and check something out as well. He suggested that Guillermo find out who was stronger right here and now, namely through an arm wrestling competition. The man laughed and agreed, but asked him not to complain if he pulled his arm off. Damien also threatened him in response and said that he would also be gentler and would stop only at the dislocated shoulder. They held hands, and Guillermo didn't even have time to think about anything because Damien grabbed him and threw him into the deflection. He pinned the man down with virtually no effort. Considering the reputation this knight has, Damien has once again made an incredible impression on those around him. Guillermo was the first to try to grab Damien's arm, but he used Guillermo Blackwing's power against him. As a result, it was not difficult for him to throw his opponent to the floor. Jael noted to himself that Damien was not only very strong, but also capable. But it didn't end there. Guillermo was seriously angry. How dare Damien humiliate him like that? Damien said the knight was much tougher than he'd imagined. He really had wanted to dislocate his shoulder. The knight grabbed his axe and promised to tear Damien to pieces. He took out 2 battle axes and took up an attack position. Chelsea tried to stop her protege, but the mercenary, in a fit of anger, attacked the guy, wanting revenge. However, suddenly, his purple aura mixed with someone else's green one. Jael stopped the man with his strength, not allowing him to hit the brown-haired man. How dare he brandish a weapon in the presence of his lordship? Jael ordered him to stop unless he wanted to face his own death. Damien was surprised by the intense pressure the old man's aura exerted. He hadn't risen to such a high rank through mere merit. Jael said that he would turn a blind eye to this incident only once, and then only in consideration of Lady Chelsea's honor. But let the thug keep in mind that there will be no second chance. Deprived of strength by someone else's magic, Guillermo fell to his knees and began to breathe heavily. Summing up the meeting, the Duke admitted that there had been a bit of a commotion. It would be better if Sir Damien retained his position as candidate. Howitt stood up for the young lady and stated that the fight was unfair. Sir Guillermo was allegedly still recovering from the exhaustion caused by the trip, and Damien had a huge advantage. Furthermore, Sir Guillermo is a knight who uses weapons. His abilities cannot be assessed by simple fistfights. Seizing the new opportunity, the girl supported the knight and declared that it was necessary to fairly compare their skills not in hand-to-hand combat, but in an official duel. Her father rudely asked her to stop insisting on her own way. He slammed the table angrily for silence and told his daughter to stop bragging about her incompetence. The girl was so stunned by her father's raised tone that she was unable to utter a word in response. She lowered her head in fear and admitted that she had been impolite. Howitz couldn't figure out what to do with himself from anger, but he also couldn't find the words to counter the ruler's order. But then another person raised his hand, completely unexpectedly. Damien asked permission to express his opinion. He said he wanted to accept Lady Chelsea's offer of a duel. The Duke looked at him in confusion, but eventually allowed the duel to take place, since both sides agreed to it. A little later, Victor asked the gentleman why he did this, but Damien refused to give the reason for his action. They wandered around the town square for a while until they finally reached their destination. This was the forge the Duke had told them about. Adam showed him mercy and said that he would pay Damien to make a new sword, since his was broken during the fight with Howitz. The blacksmith had been warned of their arrival, so when he saw the strangers, he immediately realized that they had come from the Duke for the sword. The guy led them into the next room, where they had various goods. Damien walked inside and saw a variety of swords, all neatly arranged on stands. He and Victor began examining them. All the weapons looked simply amazing. However, one sword interested Damien the most. The blacksmith noticed this and said that this sword was unique. It was custom-made for a knight who once worked for the duchy. Due to an urgent matter, he was forced to leave service in haste before the sword was completed. Damien smiled and asked, "Did that knight, by any chance, give the blacksmith the single ringing steel to create a sword?" The guy said yes. The shape of the sword is similar to the master's favorite weapon, nicknamed the musical sword. Damien said he would choose it, and the blacksmith was surprised that he did so, knowing what the single ringing steel was. Unlike regular rare metals that increase mana, it has a unique nature that pushes out mana and causes waves. Damien asked the seller what the name of this sword was. The blacksmith remembered it with difficulty, but he said that the would-be owner said that he would call it the Thousand Li sword. Having taken the sword, as well as some other weapons, Damien noticed that some unfamiliar girl came out to meet him. She said she was glad that Damien liked the work of the local craftsman, and she introduced herself to him as Rebecca. She serves Lady Chelsea. The girl conveyed that her mistress had requested a meeting with Damien. If he didn't mind, would he have a little time? Damien said that they had nothing to discuss with her, but the maid disagreed. The boy noticed that the servant was speaking without actually getting to the point, but rather trying to appease him. Maybe it would be worth going and checking? Having made his decision, he nevertheless agreed and asked the girl to take him to her mistress. She took him to a restaurant run by Lady Chelsea. Reservations are required here, and only those in the know can visit. However, today the entire restaurant is empty so that Damien can visit it in comfort. The girl led him to the largest hall and stopped at the massive door, saying that he was expected inside. Damien opened the door, but before he could step inside, he noticed something strange. A strange aroma permeated the room. He stepped inside to find Chelsea already pouring wine into the glasses she had prepared. She noticed that Haxon had arrived a little late and invited him to come in and sit down opposite her. The girl didn't look unfriendly, but her smile didn't bode well either. The guy walked inside and asked why she invited him, but the girl offered him something to eat first. He said he didn't like to waste time and asked her to get down to business. If so, she has no choice. She admitted that she had one request for Damien. The girl wants the brown-haired man to step back from his position as the duchy's representative. She, of course, believes in Guillermo's powers and thinks that if he takes the Thors into his hands, then someone like Haxon is nothing to him. But she asks him to refuse because she wants to preserve his strength during preparations for the duel with the Marquise's family. It would be very unpleasant if he got injured due to a pointless fight. There's merit to her words, but why would Damien fulfill her request? What reason would it have for him? She said that she could give Damien anything he asked for: money, fame, or other such things. Damien didn't like the way the girl judged others so thoughtlessly and arrogantly only by their status. Damien said that the Duke could give him the same, and even more if necessary. Chelsea asked if it wouldn't be better to secure the future Duchess's goodwill in advance. Therefore, if he is not a fool, he should better go to his father right now and refuse the duel. Better yet, let him give up his role as a representative. Damien smiled confidently and said that he didn't want to do that. For some reason, the girl was very surprised by his answer. She said that everything was supposed to go completely wrong, and Damien knows that she was surprised that the enchanting aroma that was in the room didn't affect him. Enchanting scent is a form of dark magic that creates false attachment to manipulate people. Having retained knowledge of dark magic from his past life, Damien sensed it the moment he entered the room. Usually, this concentration is enough to turn any person into a slave within an hour. But the power of God Damien completely absorbed this magic, and he did not succumb to its charms. But in front of the girl, Damien played the fool and asked what else had gone wrong with her. The girl tried to justify herself and asked why he rejected her offer, since it was so profitable. Haxan turned around and declared he didn't need her help. She couldn't give him what he really wanted. Losing control, the girl asked, "So what does Damien want then?" Without turning around, he firmly replied that all he needed was happiness for his family. And after that, he said that he would leave the surprised and confused girl. And he asked her to tell Guillermo to prepare well for the duel. Before Damien left, Chelsea asked if his family was really that important to him. She decided to take advantage of this and resort to threats. The girl said that if Haxan did not cooperate with her, she would send people who would completely destroy his family's house. Her crazy scarlet eyes shimmered in the sun, and her evil gaze shot sparks. At this point, Damien couldn't take it anymore and grabbed the impudent girl by the throat and pinned her to the table. The girl screamed and ordered him to let her go, but Damien did not obey. The girl's personal bodyguards came running at the noise. They grabbed their swords and ran towards Damien. How dare he hurt their mistress? Damien immediately let go of the girl, and a burning mark from the strong grip of his palm remained on her neck. Damien ran between the bodyguards at lightning speed, and with a short dagger he cut their necks, causing the guys to fall to the floor. He said coldly that the cuts were not deep, so they needed to apply a potion to the wounds, and they would not die. Damien said that after that he really wanted to slit her throat, but he would restrain himself. It would seem that this would be too merciful a punishment for her. So let her now expect other terrible things that she may face in the near future. He grinned menacingly at her, lingering in the doorway, and then calmly walked away. The girl looked after him, trembling slightly with panic and fear. The guards were gasping for breath on the floor, trying to stop the bleeding with their palms. Rebecca suddenly came running to the noise and asked Mrs. Chelsea what had happened and if she was okay. The girl said in a distraught voice that this idiot Damien dared to humiliate her, but she would kill him for it. She screamed loudly and called out to a certain Mustang Fury. A short, plump man named Mustang immediately arrived in the room. Chelsea asked him what the hell happened and why the enchanting scent didn't work on someone for the first time. The man tried to explain that there are people who are immune to black magic, but she threw something at his forehead and called him a fool. Then Fury told her that Guillermo was currently at the tavern. He said he needed to let off some steam after what happened that day. The girl called the knight a complete psychopath because he was drinking on the eve of a duel. Fury promised her that the knight would be able to defeat Haxan, as he had never seen anyone with such strong dark magic before. He asked Chelsea to be patient. They, Yulan, would undoubtedly help her seize control of the duchy. The girl looked at him angrily and said that the man had better keep his word, otherwise she would finish him off first. A quiet evening slowly descended upon the city. The duel will take place tomorrow. And Damien stood outside the restaurant the entire time of the conversation, next to the window, and overheard absolutely the entire dialogue between the enemies.